Hey everyone, and welcome back to the It's Knowable podcast. I'm your host, Noah Braden, and today we're continuing our series of in-depth interviews about topics at the intersection of truth, beauty, and Catholicism, with a discussion about resisting radicalism as traditional Catholics. So, for tonight's show, I am happy to invite on my good friend, Kyle Whittington. So, Kyle, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Howdy. Well, hey, thanks for having me on. It's been quite the whirlwind here lately in the Whittington house. So, it's kind of nice to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. And I think I would appreciate it anyways, but I'm extra appreciative. I only have two children of my own, but I can kind of imagine and extrapolate. If I just sort of multiply that by, I don't know, X number of multipliers,
Yeah.
I can kind of imagine and commiserate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jokes aside, super happy for you, and congratulations again
Thank
publicly.
You. Thank you. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. So for those in the audience who don't know, at the end of August, we welcomed our fifth kid. I'm still not back to work yet, and at the same time, we are also in the middle of moving to Steubenville. So it is absolutely insane. So please pray for us. So yeah.
No, definitely. And Kyle, if you don't mind just giving an introduction to those on my channel. I know we have a lot of overlapping audience members, but for those who don't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and, what should we know about you?
Yeah. So I guess, my name is Kyle Whittington. I run the channel that bears my name because I have zero creativity in my body. And, I'm a convert to the Catholic faith. I converted whenever I was 18 years old in a story that involved a cute girl and free pizza. Cute girl that I did not marry, but pizza that I did eventually consume.
We can link that video down below after the fact.
Yeah. To answer the question of the audience, no, this is not a turtleneck. I just have a beard. It's just a regular old t-shirt. Yeah. So anyway, I run a channel that's apologetics based. I do a little bit of work. Well, so I am Trent Horn's digital assistant. So if y'all are commenting on the Council of Trent, that's probably me that's responding. So if you have that dash Kyle, that's me that's responding. If you get nothing, then you're getting Trent. So yeah. But anyway, that's I guess that's me in a nutshell. And that's as much as I can share in like a little 45-second blurb or whatever.
No, I think that's perfect, and I think the other relevant, salient, juicy details will come out naturally and organically throughout the course of the evening. So I'm just cracking up a little bit at Veritas's "It's Kyleable." I can't even pronounce it. It's funny to read it, but I can't even pronounce it. It's Kyleable, yeah. But that's our duo, I guess, on air duo. Oh man, I should stop reading the comments. I made this mistake before, where it's like it's much better when I leave the comments, the live feed, to like a designated time at the end when I actually like give time to them. Otherwise, I'm just inevitably darting my eyes backwards and forwards. So I don't know if you have that same problem, but I just had to hide the comments. So everyone, Kyle can probably see them though.
Yeah, no, I'll keep an eye on them for you, so that way you can know for a fact that you're not missing anything.
Oh well, very good. Well, yeah, no, Kyle, I think one of the reasons I'm especially excited to talk to you in particular tonight is because we're talking about, resisting radicalism, but in particular as traditional Catholics, right? And I think that is something that is unfortunately becoming more and more closely associated, those two things being radicalism and traditionalism. And of course, as someone who loves tradition and who's someone who loves Latin Mass and someone who attends a Byzantine Catholic parish and just adores tradition, I resent this association, but I also understand it. So I think one of the reasons I'm particularly excited to bring you on is because I think you have a unique vantage point, more specifically grounded in the Latin Mass particulars than I am. But I think with a similar approach, or at least a similar perspective. Can you just speak a little bit about, what's your, what's your parish, what's your Catholic tradition that you're part of?
Yeah.
And how did you come to be a part of it, I suppose?
Yeah, so I suppose I go to an Institute of Christ the King oratory in St. Louis, Missouri. It's St. Francis de Sales Oratory. It is arguably the most beautiful church in the U.S. In fact, in 2017, it did actually win a competition, winning the title of most beautiful church in the U.S., although I can go into the details on the architecture there, but nobody cares about architecture,
I mean, I
except for
kind
like
of do, but my audience probably doesn't. Like, I kind of want to
two
stop
people.
here, but
Yeah, so
everyone
for the
else will
two
drop
people,
off.
yeah. So for the two people that are interested in that, look it up. It's a beautiful church. But yeah, so the Institute of Christ the King is a Latin Mass celebrating group. We started going there back in 2019. It was about August. It was end of August of 2019, and what spurred that on is we kind of got sick of hearing heresy from the pulpit.
Hmm.
Um, it was the Feast of the Assumption, and I remember I was at work. I was working weird hours, and I wasn't able to make it to mass, but my wife did. And uh, during that mass, the priest started advocating for women's ordination. Like he's like, and that's why we should start ordaining women. Blah 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 blah. And my wife was just like, earmuffs on the kids' ears, and was just like, oh my goodness, and she just left. And you know, and that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, because we were going to a really, really, I don't want to call it a bad parish, but there was some questionable things being said during the masses there. And so I had been kind of on like the Catholic memes subreddit, and like the meme that stands in particular, it was talking about like, how to drive a bus, which way makes more sense, with the bus driver facing the people or the bus driver facing the road. And I was just kind of like, what? But it was such a perfect analogy, and it was just like, okay, yeah. And so I was kind of already feeling that draw, and we kind of got I needed to get over a few hangups before I wanted to go to the Latin Mass. And believe it or not, it was actually Taylor Marshall who helped me get over some of those things. And he was talking about how, you don't have to worry about what the priest is saying in Latin. It's like, oh, in particular, when the priest is speaking really low, it's like, I can't hear him. I don't understand what he's saying. And I'll never forget it. And it's fantastic advice, but it's just like, don't worry about it. He's not talking to you. And just whenever I heard that, like, it just, everything clicked for me. And we started going to the Latin Mass there. It was great. Beautifully beautiful mass. And then the priests are also just absolutely phenomenal. If y'all ever get the chance to like go eat dinner with some of the canons of the Institute of Christ the King, go for it, because those guys are as hospitable as they are intelligent and just kind. So it's wonderful. So that's where we go now. Well, for now, because we're in the midst of a move. So, but yeah, so that's a little bit of the background that I'm coming from.
No, that's great. And is the move public? In case I allude to it later. I mean, you just alluded to it, but I mean, is it public?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
I figured as much. I thought so. I just never know sometimes whether I'm talking to you in a semi-private or
Oh
semi-public,
yeah,
or it's kind of
yeah.
situation. So
No,
okay, great.
I am happy to uh, recommend that everybody go check out, go to mass at St. Francis Sales Oratory, St. Louis, Missouri. It's phenomenal.
That's awesome. So you're looking forward to? I'm guessing. I guess they have a weekly Latin Mass or monthly Latin Mass. I think in Steubenville, if I recall. But
Yeah, they do. They
I know
do.
that's controversial somewhat because of the restrictions. I've read a little bit about it. I'm an outsider, so.
Well, I'm not going to get too much into that, though. I will tell you this: I have a friend who celebrates Latin masses regularly in the Diocese of Steubenville, and his reaction to that is, while Bishop Monforton has done things that are worthy of criticism, the way he's handled the Latin mass situation is not one of them.
Hmm.
And this is like, he's like the most tratty priest in the diocese, and he's like, no, actually, this is something that he needs to be commended on, because he says it's like he handled a bad situation better than I thought was possible, quite frankly. So I was just like, oh, okay. So, so if y'all see Bishop Monforton, he's heading to the Archdiocese of Detroit as an auxiliary bishop here soon. So hey, if y'all meet him, be sure to shake his hand, tell him thank you, and kiss his ring. So
Yeah, that's wonderful. I heard he's going home, or going back toward his back to his home parish, or something of the like, or to
yeah,
be toward near family or something. So I was happy for him. I don't know him at
yeah.
all, but I thought that was a nice thing.
I do see one quick question in here. So Veritas is asking, what makes it an oratory? Okay, so real quick, A parish is not a building. A parish is a geographical boundary, kind of like a city, like city limits or a county or something like that. So you live in a parish. And then the church building is where you go to. What makes an oratory specific is that it doesn't have, it is literally just a building that anybody is allowed to go to. So it doesn't have like a geographical boundary or whatever. So that's why it's an oratory. It doesn't have any claims. And actually, it's funny because St. Francis de Sales is within walking distance to another Catholic church called St. Wenceslas, and that is a parish. So like St. Francis de Sales Oratory is in like the St. Wenceslas parish. So it's interesting. So, but anyway, that's the difference between a parish and an oratory.
It it's funny because I didn't even know who that saint was until recently. There's a parish, actually the Latin Mass parish in. No, I'm so sorry. That's Stanislav. I am so sorry.
Oh yeah,
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay.
I'm mixing up the obscure saints that I did not know as a relatively new convert. So apologies if they're not obscure to some people. I'm also
It's
sorry.
okay.
There's no harm meant.
Well, hey, the biggest marks of these saints' identity is Jesus Christ. So, if you confuse the two, I'm sure that they have the humility to say, like, well, as long as to God goes all the glory.
I am so glad that that is a great point, Kyle, and I'm so sorry because I made the mistake of going back to the comments. But fortunately, I did it before Haley came in trying to distract me, so that's great because it's basically my comment of about being distracted by the comments set off a slew of comments making an effort to, in fact, distract me. So as they should. So that's wonderful. But no, a couple of things that you said there I think really stood out to me. It's interesting because one, prior to my conversion to Catholicism, some of the only interactions I had with Catholic Mass of any type was actually a Latin Mass. And of course, perhaps this was because of stereotypes. Being a Protestant, I associated the Latin Mass much more so with modern Catholicism, I think, perhaps than modern Catholics do. Just because to me, it was like Catholicism was a Latin Mass. I just sort of associated, right? Because it wasn't because I knew the history in detail, it was rather because I didn't. I just sort of associated somewhat anachronistically, I think, just sort of assumed, anyways, might have got that word wrong. But it's just such an interesting thing because now, of course, we're living in a time where it's become quite a sticking point for many people, and it's become weaponized, I think, by both sides. And that makes me sad, even though I'm not someone who regularly attends a Latin Mass. It just makes me very sad because it seems to be such an integral and foundational element of Catholicism. In particular, I'm speaking of Western Catholicism, of course.
Right.
But that's from our perspective as American Catholics, that's not insignificant. And so to get a little bit more positive and proactive, I mean, what can we do to kind of be working against this, right? Against this kind of negative association that seems to be happening, against this weaponizing, without undervaluing it, right? Without kind of pushing it to the side, because that seems to be an unsavory solution as well. Do you have any thoughts about that? Just the weaponization and what can we do to kind of push back on that?
Yeah. So I guess I kind of want to just point out like the underlying issue here, and that's you got to keep your eyes on the prize, eyes on Jesus Christ. He is the way. He's not a way, he is the way. So the way is narrow, and many will deviate from the path. Satan does not care if you are too far to the left or too far to the right. As long as you're off the path, there's many different ways to go, but there's only one, the way. So as long as you can go like off finding your own like hyper conservative, whatever offshoot group, that's fine. That's fine with Satan too. So that is kind of like the main issue that I see is, moderation. Virtue is found in moderation. And there are times where, and heck, you still have to moderate your moderation too, because there are some things that we should be radically opposed to, especially by like cultural standards and whatnot. So I think you and I would both consider ourselves radically pro-life, at least.
Sure,
if we're talking to like the average American.
I'm okay to offend people by saying that one. That's one of my few lines I'll draw in the sand. That's
exactly. So and if we're radically pursuing Jesus Christ, but all of this, and this is where it comes, like I guess on a personal level, that all of this has to be tempered with obedience. Now, I've noticed just
Mm.
in my own community, which every single community is going to be different. I've heard I've stopped like blanket suggesting like, oh, just go find your nearest Latin mass to somebody, because it's just like, well, that's not always a good idea. It really depends on the community. But in my community, we have a lot of converts. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of Protestant converts there, like myself included, my wife included.
Yeah.
And what I find happening is that there's very few people who are coming in from Protestantism straight to this Latin Mass community. But instead, it's kind of a similar thing. Like they were going to the local Novus Ordo. They felt that that was being detrimental to their faith, so they found the Latin Mass. That's a very, very, very common story. In fact, like it's like the circuit that you normally see is like local parish. You go to the cathedral, then you start going to St. Francis de Sales. So yeah, which the cathedral that we have in St. Louis is also absolutely gorgeous. Um,
And
but
St.
yeah,
Francis de
so
Sales is actually the Latin Mass parish here. The FSSP parish here in
oh, nice.
Atlanta is actually St. Francis as well. So for whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, in that, I would say if you are the holiest person that you know, if you are the person that knows more about the faith than anybody else, you have run into a massive problem. Um, that's never okay. Unless like you are one of like 6 people on the planet. And if you're listening to this, I promise you, you're not one of those 6. Uh, you know, so, you need somebody to be able to identify when you're going wrong. For me, that's going to be the canons at church. I have a great amount of respect for them. They've corrected me on things, and I have enough respect for them, enough trust with them to like say, oh, okay, I see where I went a little wrong on here, including what I thought was, uh, you know, I was trying to defend Pope Francis on some stuff, and it was the rector that pointed out, like, okay, well, you're prior military. You see a group of, you see one airman doing wrong. You found one airman doing wrong. You find a group of airmen doing wrong, and then you need to look for the leader.
Mm.
And it's just like, okay, that's actually a really good point, and it's true in the church as well. But I guess, yeah. So what can we be doing is just focus on obedience, because you'll never find a saint that just went off like absolute like disobeyed orders of their superior after taking a vow of obedience. Like that's never done that. Now you will see saints who were doing amazing things and got ordered to stop.
Right.
Saint Joseph Cupertino, Saint Padre Pio, those guys did get ordered to stop, and then they did. So yeah, it's the disobedience isn't going to make you a saint. It didn't make them saints, and it won't make you one either.
Mm.
So yeah. But anyway, I've been going on a little bit. I want to see where you want to go from here.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're saying so many interesting things, and you're bringing up so many ideas in my head. So I guess I want to just jump on a couple of them. One thing that you mentioned, I think that I can really resonate with, despite a different application of it, is what you mentioned about not being able to hear the priests, and I think implicit in that is a shift in focus, right, away from, away from us in a sense, right, in a way from our needs and kind of our being fed in a particular way, and kind of more our listening, our participating, our kind of receiving God kind of, I think it seems a little it seems to be a shift in emphasis, right? I'm not trying to say that one is only possible in one or anything like that, but it seems that that seems to be a common recurring theme in people who support Latin Mass and kind of push for it, is that, worship is supposed to be about God. It's not supposed to be seeker friendly, to use a more kind of Protestant thing, which is really interesting because when I was a Protestant, excuse me, long before I became a Catholic, I started to push back against on some of those seeker friendly tendencies within Protestantism, right? And that kind of led me more towards a traditional, theologically grounded, version of Protestantism, which eventually led me to realize that what I considered Orthodox Christianity was in fact fully contained within Catholicism. But that was a long series of things. But it was interesting because the seeker-friendly dichotomy, that was prevalent, I think, in the Protestant discussions that I was having years ago. And it's such an interesting thing to kind of see this Catholic version of it, in a sense, with respect to the Latin Mass and with more traditional masses, I think, in general, versus a
Mhm.
Novus Ordo. And it brings in all those discussions. Should we seek to please the audience? I mean,
Yeah.
should it be about entertainment? These types of side questions start slipping in, and I just think it's really interesting that it's a nearly ubiquitous struggle. And maybe it's a human struggle in some ways, kind of our tendency to want to make the liturgy about us versus kind of submission, right? And then that's what's really interesting,
Yeah.
because in some ways that what sparked that most recently was your comment about obedience, which is a really maybe an ironic point, because those people who celebrate the traditional liturgies being about worshiping God the way God is supposed to be worshiping, are emphasizing this obedience in that focus, right? But then there also tend to be the same ones who sometimes let that love for a particular liturgy take them to a point of disobedience,
Yeah.
and the temperance, right? It comes back a lot to the temperance. It's how is the response moderated? To what extent is it taken? Is your anger
Yeah.
bridled, or is it just you let it just go, right? And I think there's a lot of little decisions along the way, and it's not so much is this a good situation or a bad situation. That's kind of missing the entire point. It's how should we respond to this situation, whether we agree it's good or bad or not. I don't know. It seems to be in some ways we need to shift the conversation that way. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, so you brought up, okay, once again, you brought up a few things. Um,
We need to stick to
I
one point
remember,
at a time. I'm just kidding. We don't have
so
to.
in the one philosophy class that I took at Franciscan that I failed spectacularly, there was one lesson that I did that really did stick with me. And there's this temptation that everybody has, is that whenever you find out something new, you have a tendency to look at everything through that lens. So think about whenever, Freud was coming onto the scene, it was all repression. So you look at everything through the lens of repression.
Mm,
And so that you see that in sometimes of these liturgical discussions too, because if you start thinking that, oh, we're being persecuted, you look at everything through the lens of persecution. So even whenever somebody's doing something that like has absolutely nothing to do with you, like like on my channel, I've criticized traditionalists that get a little crazy, and they took that to be, oh, you hate the Latin Mass. And it's just like, no, I'm not making fun of the Latin Mass. I'm making fun of you. And so, you see some of that. So on that end, we need to be aware of that cognitive bias to try to
mm,
do that. So to catch ourselves doing that, and then instead of trying to worship the liturgy, we use the liturgy for worship. So
mm.
it's all about just keeping those priorities, keep Jesus Christ front and center of what everything you're trying to do, and everything needs to be supporting the worship of Him. And I'll be the first to admit I'm not always the best at that.
It's
There's been
hard.
times, yeah, especially like as an online YouTuber, there's been times, and I know this is, if I have this thought, I know that I'm on the wrong track, and I need to like come back. And whenever it's instead of I want to bring this person to the truth, my mentality is I want to kick this person's teeth in,
Hmm.
and it's just like, okay, that's bad, back off. Let's try this again with more charity. So I think some of the best things that have happened on my channel are the videos that were never uploaded.
I can definitely relate to that sentiment. It's too easy, and I think this is something I just talked about a little bit on a video that I released yesterday, sort of spur of the moment, because it just was something that kept coming onto my mind, right, because of all the news around the Synod on synodality, which I'm sure we'll dig into a little bit. But it's that letting righteous indignation, and let's just assume it is righteous indignation, but when it can become this unbridled kind of monstrous rage, it can turn into this other thing altogether, I think, if we let it. And there's a danger in that. And I think there's a danger in focusing sometimes on the justice side of the anger at the expense of what
Mhm.
it's doing to our own souls in the process of our giving into the anger. And it's easy
Yeah.
to be like, no, but it's just this is something that deserves anger. Don't you see? And it's like, well, maybe it does, but even so, don't you see what it's doing to your soul in the process? It's consuming you. And I'm not talking about
Yeah.
anyone in particular. I'm talking about a lot of people. I'm talking about myself at times, and I'm probably talking about you and a lot of other
Oh,
people.
yeah.
So I don't know, but it's an interesting thing because it starts out innocent, or at least I think it does. But it's
Mhm.
very quickly manipulated, right? But then that brings up to mind, the nature of the devil's work, right? I mean, he's the deceiver, and some of the best
Mhm.
deceptions are those that start with half truths, partial truths, almost complete
Yeah.
truths, and just have a slight distortion at the end. Some of those are the most dangerous, right? Because those are the ones that fuel ideologically driven
Mhm.
extremism, while at the same time enabling the people who are indulging in that extremism to justify it to themselves and actually believe that they're blameless because it's mostly true, that they're mostly right in their judgment. Or does that make any sense? I mean, I'm kind of speaking
Yeah.
generally, but I think it applies so much to the situation that we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess there's another part that I wanna say that because the temptation is also like to say that we are up on this castle on the hill and we're looking down
Mm,
on the poor peons and whatever. And I appreciate like you especially says like, hey, I'm there too. And it's
mm,
just like first recognize that you are also one of the mud people. You are in the mud in the muck and you're in the trenches with the rest of us. And that we're all in the same boat. We're Catholic, and the bark of Peter is by far the best boat to be on, but hey, there's quite a few smelly people here. Uh, but one thing that and then another temptation is just like to just completely just crap all over the rad trads. It's
yeah.
just like, you people are being so unreasonable. Haha, you're dumb. I'm smart. And that's also the wrong approach. And anybody who's been Catholic for a little while and has been regularly going to a Novus Ordo, they're probably not. You're probably familiar with liturgical abuses. I
Mm.
mean, anybody who's had to sit through songs, sit through was it the glory to God, the Gloria set to like the My Little Pony theme song, or
Oh, yeah.
there's this one hymn I can't remember, but it's set to one of the songs from Willy Wonka, and whenever I heard that, I was just like, is this for real? So these are liturgical abuses, and while this is not as far as like the personal level goes, I'm not going to say that anybody who's uh, gone through any sort of physical abuse, emotional abuse, or worse than that. I don't want to put that on the same level as those, but these people are still victims of abuse. So that's
Mm,
going to damage their trust, and it's also going to like put gas on a fire that's there. So a lot of these people, they're not coming from a place of hatred for the Pope. They're not coming from a place of that's like, oh, they want to destroy the church. They want to build the church in their own image. That's not what they're trying to do.
mm,
They love the faith. They've been hurt, and they're coming instead of acting out of a place for love of Jesus Christ, they're acting out of a place for hurt. So it's that violence has a way of twisting love and making it do things that are not loving, and we see that as a result of liturgical abuse as well. So what's the solution for that? If like you're in the middle of nowhere, you've got one priest and he doesn't care too much about the liturgy. To be honest, I don't have the answer for that except for prayer and fasting.
yeah, it's hard.
Um, yeah, and it's just like I wish I had as Americans, especially like, oh, our politician, oh, our Speaker of the House isn't doing a great job. Here, let's just pull him down. Like to use a contemporary example, it's just like in the church, power doesn't flow from the people up; it comes from the Christ down. And quite frankly, as laity, we're on the bottom rung. The only way that we can affect the church leadership is by having lots of sons and have them become priests, bishops, and eventually, cardinals and the Pope. Like that's how we vote. Which also means that like the real change isn't going to happen when you're alive. It will
Mm.
happen after you're dead and your children are old men running the church. So, prayer and fasting, raise good kids, and hey, we're Catholics, we're into that suffering thing. So, it's tough. And I was like, I wish there was a better answer, but yeah.
No, I think you're right to bring that up because I think there's a tendency so often in all types of situations that are emotionally driven and emotionally charged. There's this tendency to um, kind of go the other side, right? They kind of have an overreaction to an overreaction, and then
Hmm.
dismiss these concerns as entirely, as nothing, kind of as trivialize the concerns. And that's
Right.
certainly not the answer either, because if anything, that's just adding fuel to the fire, making them feel even more invalidated, less taken care of, less understood, kind of more isolated, which all of these things, I believe, I mean, are the exact types of things that feed extremism. It feed this sort of radical leaning mentality is when you start to feel isolated, feel misunderstood, feel that everyone else is out to get you. And I'm not trying to paint them
Hmm.
into a conspiratorial box. I mean, I think it's somewhat reasonable, um, at least if you imagine yourself in the same echo chambers that they're in. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably a really crucial point, right? They're not seeing the same perspective that you and I might be seeing necessarily. From their perspective, it might feel like they're down in the trenches, just being
Yeah.
beaten up on all the time, relentlessly. And then they're getting fed all this news, right? That affirms that confirms their suspicions in many ways, and then a lot of the times the traditionalist pundits are fueling that as well by talking
Yeah.
about it constantly. And it's interesting because so often the people that I've made friends with in various parishes are people that are very traditional. Many of them
Hmm.
are Latin mass goers, or the Byzantine parish that I go to. Many of our dear friends here attend that. I mean, so most of my dear friends, despite the fact that I push so hard, for the Novus Ordo in principle, many of my
Sure.
friends kind of in practice and on the ground, do tend towards that extreme. I mean, somewhat more towards the extremes. I mean, and I don't mean that in a negative sense here, but like towards the one side, a far side, if you will. And it's interesting because the more I talk to them, the more what you just described comes out, that almost trauma in a sense. I mean, you didn't
Hmm.
describe it as such, but it almost feels like a trauma of sorts. And I think I've
Yeah.
actually heard some people describe it as such, like because they've been abused for so long. Now, whether they have the right perspective of how much abuse has occurred, I mean, we can kind of dig into all of those
Oh
things.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's appropriate to dig into them, but I think that's kind of the point: is we can still validate that there are reasonable concerns. We can validate
Oh yeah.
that there are, and I know you do a great job of this. I think I'm just confirming this because I think my tendency, especially when I first converted, was to go more the let's bash on rad trats route. I mean, I think it was. I think that was
Yeah.
kind of my natural route. And then I started to realize that all of my friends were pretty darn adjacent to that crowd, because I kept going out into the world and meeting all these people who were very sympathetic to a lot of the ideas that were being shared in the kind of so-called, rad trad
Yeah.
circles. And so that started to shift my perspective a little bit, right? When your friend starts to say, hey, well, what about Noah has never met not a friend. It's true. I call everyone my friend. I try to make it true, though. I mean, hopefully it's true.
Yeah.
See, that's what I get. I got to close these comments again. Veritas got me. But it's a helpful reminder. It is, because it's easy to let that righteous indignation that I talked about just get shifted and go right back the other direction, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, now we're the ones on the high horse. Now we're the ones who are out for blood because we're being beaten up on. We're being abused, right? It's so easy to just perpetuate this cycle of abuse. And maybe there's some truth in it, right? Maybe there's some warped sense of justice in it, but you're not going to encourage any unity, right? There's going to be no real results I mean, so
Right.
just a pure utilitarian approach would reject it. I don't know. I know I'm talking a lot, but what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Oh man, so much. So, oh goodness. So, let's see here. Well, I guess one of my thoughts on this was like, what about some practical examples? But man, I had so many thoughts on there. So it's just like, okay, which one, which one, which one? But okay, practical. Uh, we've kind of talked a little bit like the nebulous area, and I'm not meaning to derail your interview, so interrupt me. But the nebulous ideas of like, okay, there's these problems. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So one of my big questions that I always like to ask is, so what? Like,
Mm.
okay, congratulations, I have the correct opinions, which you probably won't get from listening to me. Uh, but it's like, okay, so what do we do now? How do we put rubber to pavement? Well, so there's a few practical pieces of advice that I would say, and I've found that the more time I spend in internet argumentation, the more my anxiety just skyrockets. The more that anger builds up.
Mm,
And it's just like, you know, pay attention to guys. Like, put a timer on it if you have to. Like, quantify it. How much time do you spend reading scripture, writings of saints, and whatever, versus how much time you spend arguing in comment sections or on Twitter or, watching YouTube videos?
mm,
Because if you're anything like me, that ratio is grossly off. And it's poison for your soul. And I've felt it firsthand. Like I said, earlier, I was just like, oh, some of the best videos that I've ever done were the ones that were never uploaded because
yeah.
those needed to die in silence, quite frankly. So, piece of practical advice: get to the heart of the faith. Try not to spend so much time on the fringes because you and we can get a more high-powered microscope and we can go down to the nitty-gritty. So that way, slight little details, millimeters of difference look like miles and chasms. It's just like, how could we ever agree on anything? It's just like, well, no, hey, take a step back.
Hmm.
What does the church say? And that's another thing that I have encouraged people to do. And maybe this is like the spicy part of the interview is what is actually being said. I
Mm,
don't care what CNN said the Pope said. What did the Pope actually say?
yeah.
I whenever in my interview with Father John Brown recently, which I thought was fantastic, no, totally unbiased, was how am I the one that's quote unquote Pope splaining when all I'm doing is just repeating what the Pope said with no spin,
Yeah.
and the ones who are spinning the ambiguity, how are those the ones who are like the arbiters and defenders of truth? And it's just like, hold on. CNN like hates the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Why are you taking your news from them? It's just like, oh, because, it's like, okay, is it because they're, criticizing a guy that you don't like? It's, I can't remember who said it, but it's just like, you should pay attention to the compliments of your enemies and the criticisms of your friends.
Mm,
And it's just like, don't pay attention to the criticisms of your enemies. Like, they're going to criticize you on everything.
yeah.
So it's just like, hey, don't, it's like, oh, the Catholic Church is changing their teaching. It's just like, no, we're not. I promise you we're not. That people have been singing that song for 2,000 years. No, we're not. So, yeah. So anyway,
No, I think
I want to toss it back to you.
well, no, I think it's a great point, and I think we're more in sync even than I realized. Actually, it was something I talked about in my video yesterday. I haven't had a chance to finish your video. I started the one with John, with Father John, and it was great at the beginning. I need to go back to it, but yeah, I was talking about that just yesterday in my video. Like, stop getting your Catholic news, right? Your insider Catholic news from secular news sources. I mean, they hate the church. I mean, exactly like you said. I mean, why would you trust them for that insider news? I mean, I'm not saying don't get this very general, like, oh, the Pope took a visit. Okay, fine. Yeah. You can trust some basic reporting to be fairly accurate. But when they start talking about the nuances of theological changes and doctrinal discussions, like, maybe don't go to CNN or Fox or whatever. I mean, or the Daily Wire, right? I mean, don't trust
Right.
Ben Shapiro for your insider Catholic news. And my wife loves Ben Shapiro. Like, so like, it's not like I'm saying that is, I mean, I don't know if I do, but my wife does, so that's something, right?
Yeah.
But my point is just, we're going to the wrong sources. And so often it's low hanging fruit. Like you said, you don't have to go to even other Catholic news sources. Just go to the official documents, read it for yourself, judge it according to a plain reading. If you need more, go to a trusted source that has done an analysis of the primary document, right? Some of this is basic research tactics. Go to the primary sources. If the primary
Yeah.
source isn't clear and you need another one, go to a closely associated secondary source. Like, that
Yeah.
is an expert, someone who actually knows that particular thing, not some unrelated expert who happens to be good at talking about it. And that includes us, right? Like, if it's not in my realm of expertise, I try to always be very honest about, like, look, I'm
Yeah.
commenting as like a whatever I am, just someone, someone in the comments
Yeah.
section, or whatever it is. And there's only a couple things that I'll say even semi-authoritatively, and even then I usually put a 20 asterisk behind it anyway.
Yeah,
Uh,
and there's something to be said about Philip, who a fellow apologist with us at Cross the Tiber. He
mm,
said a line once in there, and I've repeated it so many times. Sometimes our heads have to tell our hearts what's true. If you know that you're coming from that place of like abuse of trauma from various church leaders, a priest, and I'm not talking anything that would get you demonetized, but like liturgical abuse is specifically what I'm talking about. Um, maybe you understand that. So, you might have some inclinations to get a little cynical and be like, oh, yeah, no. But one thing that Father John and I also talked about was the Ignatian presupposition, which is
mm,
where every good Christian should presuppose that somebody intends something orthodox. So,
mm.
Pope Francis speaks ambiguously a lot. That shouldn't be controversial to say.
No, it's
Um,
he's incredibly unclear in his language. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, Uh, and it's just like, okay, cool. Well, so if you could, and this is an example Matt Fradd uses. If I say, I never said you stole my wallet, um, you know, that could mean so many different things. But if you and I are in
That's
a
such a Matt
casual, it's like,
Fradd thing. I can hear him saying it now in my mind. I won't try to do the
yeah,
accent.
because that could just be still me accusing you of stealing my wallet, or me just saying like, oh, no, 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 I'm not accusing you at all.
Right.
Um, Or I could, it so many different ways that you could do that. I could still be accusing you of being a thief, or I could be defending your honor, basically.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
like, well, I never said you stole my wallet, or versus like, I never, ever, ever, ever said that you stole my wallet. So that's an ambiguous statement. So charity dictates that you should believe that, at first you should say, okay, I bet he meant this in the best way that I
Mm,
can read this. And when you read the Pope's ambiguous statements, that is the best way to do it.
mm,
And sometimes you should, and sometimes what you do is you read that or listen to it, and he might even be joking. For instance, whenever this was hilarious, whenever Pope Francis called what's his name, the chosen guy, is it Dallas Jenkins,
yeah, yeah,
whatever?
yeah. He's
Yeah,
the
he
director.
called
Yeah.
he called Dallas Jenkins Judas. Um, it was hilarious because it was Jonathan Rumi and Dallas Jenkins. They went to Rome, and it was it's just like, oh, okay, you are Jesus in, yeah, it's like, and he looks at Dad, he's like, and I'm a Protestant, Holy Father, and he goes, oh, so you're Judas. And it was hilarious. And Dallas Jenkins took it as a joke, and
Right.
and
Right.
and they all laughed, but whatever. But if you put that in text, Pope Francis says Protestants are Judases, betrayers of Christ, blah blah
Right.
blah. Which, moving on.
No,
So,
you're absolutely right. I think
yeah,
that brings up something that has been on my mind a lot lately as well. If you're going to be incredibly incisive and judgmental and harsh about one particular statement or one particular comment, and then you entirely overlook and ignore a follow-up statement of clarification, I mean, that's just bad journalism. I mean, bad reporting. I mean, I know we're not talking about journalists
yeah,
necessarily, but it's misleading at best, right? So if there's a developing story and you are reporting something that seems bad, right? Maybe it is bad, and you report it as is, and maybe it really is somewhat of a damning report.
yeah,
Then something else comes out and that person comments on it and they make a clarification, or they say, no, in fact, I'm not going to change this thing that you keep telling me that I'm going to change, or no, this is in fact defined this way, or whatever it is. And then you completely ignore that. Then you're actually adding to the artificial framing of the situation because of
yeah,
your omissions. Now, if you just stay out of it entirely, that's another thing altogether. But if you're choosing to engage and then you're choosing to do so selectively and strategically for a particular narrative, then I think that's when I have a big problem with it. I think that's where
yeah.
a lot of people, like ourselves included, perhaps, would be particularly careful when we're swinging our words around, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, so and here's kind of how I look at it. At least this is from like a creator standpoint of view. Is it's like, Kyle, why aren't you speaking up about the failures of the Pope? I just kind of look around and I'm like, because that would just be adding to the noise. There's no shortage of people doing that right
It's
now.
true.
And
Yeah.
quite frankly, my tiny little insignificant voice isn't going to do anything. However, what I would like to do is just highlight the truth, highlight the good that's at these things. I keep looking at the wrong camera. And it's you just want to you want to put out as many fires as you can.
Mm.
There's this wonderful priest. I've actually met him. He's a brother of a friend of mine, Father Dylan Schrader on Twitter, and he was talking about the Pope's his ambiguous statements are like a bullet on a table. And it seems like whenever the Pope puts out an ambiguous statement, the left scrambles to get the bullet, loads it in their guns, and shoots.
Yeah.
It's like, hold on. Why are the Orthodox people not touching that bullet? Why are we not scrambling for it too?
Mm.
Like it's ambiguous. It could go either way. So why are we not pushing back on this? And
Yeah.
especially he's the Holy Father. Recently, I heard Father Jason Sharon say something along the lines of, when Noah was drunk and naked, what did his three sons do? Well, Ham, uncovered his father's nakedness. He took advantage of the situation, humiliated him, asserted his dominance,
Mm.
while Shem and Japheth, covered their father's nakedness. And, if Pope Francis in his ambiguity and his confusing statements are a lot like laying naked, then as faithful sons of the church,
Mm.
that maybe, that's what we should be doing too. We should be trying to cover our Holy Father's nakedness.
Yeah.
And yeah. So that's my thoughts on that from like the creator standpoint of view. And whenever it's just kind of one of those things like, should I speak up? Should I not? Sometimes I think it's always important to remember what St. Joseph said. Which was literally nothing.
Yep. I was waiting. I was waiting for you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was just that was the long silence. It was just
It was perfect.
It
It was perfect.
nothing.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think you're right, and there is something to be said about, being unhappy, suffering, even offering it up to God, and waiting patiently, and serving Him regardless of whether things turn out your way. I do think that it's another thing that I think about a lot with this. I think a lot of times we're operating out of a place of extreme luxury, right? Our ability to choose between so many different parishes, so many different priests, our ability to reach out to people online, our ability to have virtual connections with, a priest of our particular, preferred tradition. And just, it's such an interesting world. It's not so that we're just going down the road to the nearest parish and just grateful to receive the sacraments. And it's just such a different, I don't know. It's just different. I'm not trying to undermine it, right? I mean, I hope we kind of set the context sufficiently before, but I do think it's something that we all need to remember as modern Catholics, especially modern American Catholics. I mean, we're operating at this place of extreme excess when it comes to our options and our ability to connect and our ability to drive and our ability to visit. And I know that's not true of everyone, but I think it's true much more now than it ever has been, historically speaking, at the very least. So I don't know what that means exactly, but maybe to me, it means that we should be more grateful and less like just complain less a little bit about not having the perfect liturgy. I think that's what I mean by it. And I say that as someone who loves beautiful liturgy. Like, and music is one that especially gets me, right? Like, maybe I can take like the various like liturgical forms, but then like certain music just really disrupts my worship. So like, I get it. Like, I have those angry thoughts, those kind of frustrations that build up when those, what I view as abuses, crop up.
Yeah.
And yet what I typically find is I'm just like, God, like, I'm sorry for being such a petty jerk about this. Like, I mean, I think that's typically kind of where my mind goes. And I'm not trying to set myself up as a standard. I certainly am not in many ways, but I don't know. What do you think about that? Like that gratitude versus complaining and just kind of how does that fit in?
Well, I suppose whenever you're going to like what would be considered a subpar liturgy, there's a few things come to mind. One is that the worship of God is of primary importance. So anything that is deficient or an abuse in that is, in fact, an injustice. And so, there's a level of righteous anger that is appropriate whenever you see these things. However,
Yeah.
I always like to remind myself whenever I'm at one of these masses where I see these liturgical abuses, is that the absolute worst part of that mass is me. I am the worst thing about it. That is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. And here I am, this guy who often disrespects his wife, who yells at his kids, for impatience and stuff like that. And yet, Jesus Christ died for me, came to me in this. Jesus is here suffering, from these injustices, has suffered for these injustices that are ongoing right now. And here I am, just acting all indignant and not being able to focus on, the magnitude of the gift that is coming to me in that mass. So, in that, whenever you see the liturgical abuses that are going on, I think that's a good time to like reflect on your own sins and say like, wow, what kind of abuses am I doing in my life that is, an injustice toward God as well.
Yeah.
And if you're sinless and a saint, then hey, then you don't
We're
you
not
don't have
talking to you
to.
then, right?
Yeah, I'm not
You
talking
can
to
see
you
yourself
then.
out.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding. Please stay.
if you're perfect, pray for me, please.
Yeah, and teach us. Teach us. Come on,
Yeah.
actually.
Although I think like it's if you start a YouTube channel to start teaching everybody your perfect way of holiness, that's a sign that you're probably not.
Yeah.
But
Many a cult has been started under similar pretenses, so let's not join those infamous ranks. But no, I think you're right. I think you really are. I think you're onto
yeah,
something there.
yeah.
Um,
So
and
yeah,
wow, and I think that applies to like it applies to like us in terms of our conscience examination, post and hopefully before even our judgment, ideally, right? Especially before rash judgment. Um, But then I think it also maybe helps us determine practical next steps that we can take ourselves in the sense that we can all work to help improve our local parishes, whatever that local parish is to you, right? This is something that I also think about a lot, right? Maybe your parish is kind of ugly because it doesn't have that many things, and maybe you're blessed with a lot of money. Or maybe you're not blessed with money, but you're blessed with a lot of time and you're good with your hands. Like, and you can work with your priest, especially if it's a small priest or a small parish. I find that oftentimes they're very open to helping, whether that's
mm-hmm,
landscape or beautification efforts, or there's just myriad types ways that you can help cultivate the local parish that you consider to be ideal without turning into this accusatory finger pointing. Because I think so often that comes from a place of pride where we're looking for someone else to blame. And maybe there is indeed blame to be ascribed. Like I'm not saying that there isn't ever that. I'm just talking about our position as the person pointing fingers. I think
mm-hmm.
I think we should pause, right there and think, okay, is this an egregious abuse? Okay, and maybe it is. And then you follow
Yeah.
proper channels and you report it, right? I'm talking about things that don't qualify for whatever that is. That kind of like the next level, things that you strongly dislike, things that are strongly against your preferences, the anti-ideal type situations. I don't know. What do you think about that though? Because I think what you described really is a framework for next steps, as well as how to kind of keep ourselves in check, so to speak, with our judgments.
Yeah. So, there's one thing that I want to keep in mind. Actually, Mel's got Shepherdess in the comments here, who I unironically wish that after she gets married, she'll move next door to me because she's just so freaking cool. Sometimes it helps to think, if I become a saint and someone reads my autobiography when I'm dead, and learns that all I went to was a subpar liturgy, how much more God shines through. And amen to that. I think that's absolutely beautiful. But one thing that
Yeah, that's
I'm a
lovely. Yeah.
military guy. Yeah, I'm a military guy. I'm a veteran. I was in the Air Force for 10 years. So one of the things that you'll hear very often in the military is what the hell are you doing here? How'd you get in here? And after that, you'll hear, stay in your lane. So as a staff sergeant, I would have responsibility over 2 airmen. And I was responsible for myself, and I was responsible for them. If the chief of staff of the Air Force, a 4-star general, gets caught in a hotel room with his mistress, that's not on me. It's wrong. It shouldn't have happened, but that's not on me. I don't have to go before Congress and stand before him and answer for that, which the Secretary of the Air Force, the Secretary of Defense, they have to answer for that. I don't. Same thing with your priest. At your judgment, you will not have to answer for your priest. You will not have to answer for your bishop. You will not have to answer for the Pope.
Right.
You will have to answer for your loyalty to them. They will have to answer for the damage that they've done, which is that's not a, you've got him in the thumbnail. I'll call him out. Father James Altman, whenever he was gleefully smiling, talking about how, Pope Francis is talking about his damnation. That is not the appropriate response to that.
No, it's not.
The appropriate response to that is like pray and fast for our priests, for our bishops, for our Pope, and pray for more of them, because that's something that there's a priest shortage. Have kids, have sons, encourage them to go to seminary. If your son says like, hey, I'm discerning the priesthood, don't try to talk him out of it. It's so funny. The priest that I've talked to is like, oh yeah, every good Catholic wants their sons to be priests, right? And every single priest is like scoffed and goes, wait, you really think that? Because there's people that like try to talk their sons out of becoming priests, and that's the wrong call. So anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. I saw Veritas in the chat here is just like, oh, you got Kyle all fired up, and it's like, yeah, you did.
Well, I love what Veritas just said. Could you imagine being in Philippi in like 120 AD and you got to go to some stinky dude's house to have the liturgy? It's like, but it's true. I mean, that's kind of to my point, right? I mean, think about the expansion of Catholicism. Think about the missionaries in Japan, hiding from the authorities, right? Just meeting in a little hut. Like, I'm thinking like Silence now, right? Because I love Scorsese, and now I'm like imagining it in terms of the movie Silence. So that may be a problem. But, but seriously, right? Think about missionaries now, spreading across to some of the island nations. And imagine just the blessing that it is to have the sacraments brought to those places. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to say and nothing else matters, right? That's not the implied point. It's like, but maybe that helps contextualize it in terms of an ordering of our priorities, a reordering of our priorities when we're thinking about that and when we're approaching it from that place of gratitude. I mean, it's hard to be really angry and nasty when you're focused on being grateful. It just is. I can't do them at the same time. I haven't learned how.
There's a friend of mine. He says this a lot, and he means it as an insult. But there's also something to be said of like, I don't hate you, I understand you. But whenever you there is something to be said about understanding. And there was a very piece of important context that Father John added in my interview with him. And that was, whenever I read this responsa, it's written like a Jesuit superior wrote it. And he was talking about how a Jesuit superior, they're big on obedience. Saint Ignatius of Loyola added an extra vow of obedience to the Pope whenever I looked it up, because whenever I heard this, like, that doesn't sound like there had to have been at least one good Pope during his life. Nope, not a single good Pope. That was like the height of corruption in the church, and yet St. Ignatius of Loyola said loyalty to the Pope because he's the Pope, not because of any personal merits he may have. Which, it's just like, oh, wow. It's like, and whenever he said that, like the current Pope at the time was dealing with drama with his grandson, if that tells you anything. So understanding that Jesuit superiors wield a lot of authority, and whenever they speak definitively, it's like bringing a hammer down. So they do it very slowly. They speak very ambiguously. They do it because they know that whenever they speak clearly, it changes things. It necessarily changes things. So whenever you see that Pope Francis speaks not so clearly, especially off the cuff,
Mm.
it makes the news just, about makes their head explode every time he opens his mouth. But like Father John, as a Jesuit priest, was like, I mean, if he was my superior, I would expect him to communicate like this. Now, there's an argument to be said, like that's not the best for the global scale. It's like, well, he's the first Jesuit pope, so hindsight's 2020. So whatever. But yeah, and that's so understanding where somebody's coming from, because if you can understand someone, it's harder to be mad at them. And it's just like, dang, you're acting this way because this is the way you were formed. Man, I disagree with you, and you can still disagree, but it is one of those like, well, I disagree with you, but I don't hate you. And I think at this point, like whenever dealing with, if the Pope makes, or your priest even makes a decision that you don't agree with, like just try to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe that is one of the big markers, right? Because we're talking about this subject, and in one sense, it's hard to define in some sense when traditionalism becomes radical, right? Where exactly is the line? It's one of those lines that when it's crossed, but it's still hard to tell someone exactly where it lies, right? It's one of those things. You only really know it in hindsight. But it does seem that at least part of it, or at least one of the markers of when these inclinations become radicalized, or when they become too extreme, or however we want to say that, is when we start to let our criticisms and our righteous indignation turn into hatred and rejection of an entire group, or of a particular individual, I think, but of especially, I think, when it becomes a group of individuals, which is often the case, because then it creates this tribalistic, I think you mentioned war. I mean, I think it's true. It's a tribalistic battlefront mentality, where as soon as someone catches a whiff of a certain belief, they're instantly labeling that person as part of that particular tribe. And that tribe is either an ally or an enemy, and lines are drawn. This is a time of war. Like, I think that has to stop entirely, right? I mean, I think that mentality is just entirely corrosive. I think we have to remember that we are all, I don't know. It's tough. I don't. The solutions are much harder to present than the criticisms.
Yeah, well, and that is true. I see this a lot in some comments online where someone will ask a question, or they'll present 13 paragraphs as an argument, and then whenever you don't respond to the argument, it's haha, they're so intimidated, they don't want to do that. And it's like, well, no, I'm not intimidated by your question. It's just, it's going to take me 5 hours to adequately respond, and the 5 hours that I don't have. It's so much easier to make a mess than it is to clean up a mess. And that's why, like, I get so frustrated that, like, there's so many talking heads out there that are offering criticisms, but nobody's doing anything about it. And these criticisms, in fact, like, you're across the Tiber with me. You see these people, like, I am so perturbed and disturbed, by what I heard this Catholic say about the Pope. And it's just like, it's a stumbling block to people coming into the church. And that's not all like these talking heads' faults. I want to be fair and say, like, yeah, the leaders should be more careful about this, because the responsibility that they have is great. And so, but talking about, like, one of the solutions, though, is that if you want to be a traditionalist, like as a Catholic, you necessarily need to love tradition. Tradition's not a dirty word. As Catholics, like, you need to embrace it, and you need to try to live out your life as traditionally as you possibly can. And in that regard, if you want to call them traditionalists, that's fine. But go look to the best traditionalists, and those are the saints. Saint Benedict, Saint Francis de Sales, Saint Alphonsus Liguori. Go read what they wrote. Don't go listen to what Kyle Whittington or Noah Braden have to say about them. No, pick up their books and go read it in silence. If you've got time to spend 15 minutes on Twitter, you've got 15 minutes to read Introduction to the Devout Life. And I promise you, you will feel much better after reading St. Francis de Sales than you will reading the dumb meme that I just posted.
That's a great point. So, I mean, and he's almost like the Twitter equivalent. I mean, he's almost, because he was a pamphleteer, right? I mean, he's almost the ancient, not so ancient, but the
Yeah.
Reformation, Counter Reformation time era Twitter style writer in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, right? Another one that I would add to that recommendation, Intro to Devout Life, is fantastic, but Roses Among Thorns is a collection effectively of aphorisms, just these really encouraging, sometimes just a couple paragraphs at a time, sometimes a page or two. And it's exceptionally good for people who are struggling with anxiety and people who struggle with anger.
Mhm.
St. Francis de Sales is my patron saint, so I'm kind of obsessed with him mildly. And one of the things that I love about him is he's known as the gentleman saint, right? But his
Mhm.
entire life, he struggled greatly with anger. And it's such a fascinating thing because he's known for his calm demeanor and his gentlemanly thing. And then his entire time, he's journaling about these struggles with anxiety and anger and frustration. And it's such a testament, I think, to the,
Mhm.
the power of the Holy Spirit working in people through the sacraments. But yeah, Roses Among Thorns, it's just wonderful. I mean, if you ever are just, it's spiritual direction when you don't know what kind of spiritual direction you need. It's one of those books when you're just
Yeah.
sort of lost and you want to just turn to a comforting voice in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Turn to St. Francis de Sales. He's wonderful. He really
Yeah.
is.
I love Saint Francis, especially as an apologist. I love Saint Francis de Sales
We have
because,
to, right?
I mean, oh my gosh, like it's one of those things where you think that you're smart, then you read Saint Francis de Sales and you realize that you're a complete and total idiot. Um, but yeah, no, like if you want to be a traditionalist and you want to live like the saints, then read the saints. You
Yeah.
know,
And then
if you
try to
want,
live like them.
yeah, I actually one of my this was the most impactful book that I've read in my life, though. Living Guy, Cardinal Seurat, The Power of Silence. Such an amazing book. Um, and it's kind of like after reading that one, that's kind of where I got the remember what Saint Joseph said. Um, now, I, you know, it's like focus on that because especially as Americans, we like to get embroiled in political things and we like to turn the church into left versus right. And, you know, that dichotomy does not fit in the church.
Mm.
Um, one of my favorite, it was a joke, but it does make sense. It's like somebody was asking, so on the political compass, where does the Catholic Church sit? And the only answer I thought that was appropriate was above it.
Mm.
Um, and so when you start trying to put things on to, an us versus them in the church, it quickly falls apart and you're not going to be able to make sense of things because on one hand, like your bishop might be doing something that makes you very angry one day. And then the next day he's going to be writing a strongly worded letter condemning Catholics for choice. And it's just like, yeah. Oh, and I just had a 1-year-old walk in. So,
It's okay. That's
but
totally fine. Um, Veritas now has me thinking about a book club. He says someone cooler than him, so I don't know, Kyle. You might have to host it or something. I don't know. I'll kind of
nobody
like
has
join in.
ever no one has ever accused me of something so heinous, being cool. But
I
yeah,
can
so
recommend all sorts of esoteric reads for people. I don't know if that qualifies as running a book club,
yeah,
but if that is the qualification, like, yeah, I could do that.
yeah, one of my favorite priests, he's our French priest. He's actually being transferred out to a new apostolate in Massachusetts. So hey, if y'all are in Massachusetts, go look up St. Paul's Oratory because you're going to get an
Mm,
amazing priest there. But he once gave a homily because in a Latin Mass parish we've got a problem with rad trads. Like that's where they gather. And he was saying, how dare you call yourself a traditionalist if you've never read Introduction to the Devout Life, the Catechism of St. Pius X, the Catechism of the Council of Trent. And he gave one other example, but it's just like, honestly, I just gave you 3 books. Oh, shows you what a stereotypical Catholic I am. The Bible. If you haven't read the entire Bible cover to cover, start there, then start going into these things. And yeah, just you know, you want to be a traditionalist, fall in love with the tradition, and become a saint, be holy, and that's how you're really going to enact change in the church.
yeah, it's so interesting when you're talking about that. I just keep thinking something along the lines of if you actually do that with all of your time, you won't have any time left really to be mad and complain. And there's something sort of deeply ironic about that, right? Because the Bible is full of commands, and the Catechism is full of things that we should avoid, right? But more
Hmm.
importantly, perhaps it's full of things that we should fill our life with, right? The good things. And
Yeah.
the beautiful irony of that is when we pursue those virtuous things and when we fill our life up with the good things, there's no room, quite literally. I mean, if you think about it in a privation model, like a Thomistic
Yeah.
concept of evil, right? Evil is the privation of goodness. If you're full of goodness, you quite literally have no room left for evil. And it's just sort of, I know I'm kind of, blurring sort of philosophical and kind of geometrical concepts, but I think it's applicable. And that's a wonderful thing, because so often it's easy to focus only on the one, without kind of also keeping that other in line. And then that's, I think, when we start to suffer. But if we can, appropriately criticize while also, I think elevating the virtue that's grounding perhaps the
Hmm.
criticism. I don't know. I think there's just I think it just needs to be counterbalanced, with that pursuit of virtue. Wow, that was a mouthful, but
Yeah. So the Bible verse that came to mind, and I don't know the exact reference. I haven't been a Protestant for 13 years, so
yeah, we
I've lost
forget it
my ability.
immediately upon conversion, right? It just
Yeah,
blank slate. All the Bible verses go.
yeah, but that story of, like, whenever a demon's cast out, he'll leave and come back with 7 of his friends or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's just like, yeah, you might have a demon that's been cast out. You might have given up the demon of online arguments, but if you don't replace it with something good, well, guess what? It's coming back with a vengeance.
Mm.
And I do want to go ahead and Haley's got a comment about, it's like, I want to read The Power of Silence, but I feel hypocritical listening to that. Um, don't feel hypocritical about it, because one of the things that Cardinal Sarah brings up is that silence is a lot more than just no noise.
Mm.
And that's actually one of the beautiful things about the traditional Latin Mass, even with the Gregorian chant. Obviously, that's a lot of sound vibrations. There's a lot of sound going on, but it still cooperates with the silence, and it brings it elevates our minds to God. So silence is a lot more than just a lack of sound. So if all you can do is listen to it on audiobook, I would highly recommend that. And I'm not just saying that because that's the first way I went through it. But yeah, so I wouldn't feel bad about if all you can do is listen to it on an audiobook. That's fine. It's like, if you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl.
I don't know if this is gonna land with anyone, maybe with one person who will share my weird hyper niche sense of humor. But all I can think about when you're talking about the silence and the benefits of that with respect to the Latin Mass, all I can think about is Ignatian spirituality being grounded in the prayer of silence, right? And it's like, wow, even
Hmm.
rad trads and Jesuits have something in common there.
Well, so no joke, and everybody likes to crap all over the Jesuits, and
I
you
kind
know
of
what?
like them. I'm kind of, that's why I have a soft spot, kind of. So that's why I'm pushing back a little.
Modern day Jesuits is just like, okay, yeah,
Yeah, sure, sure.
there's let's
Not
a
all
lot
the
of Jesuit
criticisms
nonsense
are
out
are
there.
misfires for sure.
Exactly. It's just like, a lot of those criticisms are well warranted. But
Mm.
whenever you want to talk about some of the most fierce saints in the church, the Jesuits, I mean, the writings of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, holy smokes!
Yeah.
Like, we just had our fifth kid, and we named him Ignatius after Ignatius of Antioch. But quite frankly, I am not upset at all that there's also Ignatius of Loyola too. And the more I read about Ignatius of Loyola, I mean, he it wasn't a mistake to canonize him. And as a traditionalist, if you really want to own the Jesuits, go learn Ignatian spirituality better than the Jesuits today and
Yeah.
show them how to be a good Jesuit.
Yeah.
Oh man, now that's a terrible intention, and that's only going to fuel your pride. But the writings of Ignatius has already written the solution to the problems in the Jesuits today. They just need to go and actually live by it.
No, absolutely. I just posted something that Veritas shared, and I've done the exact same thing here in Atlanta. He talked about a Jesuit prayer retreat center, going to them for a number of years and then being life changing. That's actually exactly where I learned about the whole prayer of silence. Was at a silent retreat run by the Jesuits down here at a center,
Yeah.
and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. It really was. It was a beautiful experience, and it's the only one of its kind, at least. Oh. Wow, we went to the same one, Veritas. That was the one I went to. So I forget that you are close enough that would have been, because there's only a couple in the South that are kind of exactly like this. And I was fortunate to have one. It's like 20 minutes south of me. So,
Okay.
um,
And hey, you know what, Veritas? One of the really cool things about that is because you're so close, Noah is going to fly you and your entire family down to Atlanta. No, I'm kidding.
with my
uh,
unmonetized channel profits, all of the profits will
yes.
go your way, Veritas.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So, oh man, I had something though.
You could drive over though. You could drive over Veritas. I mean, you're close enough.
Uh,
What were you? What was right before that? You were talking about the intent. Oh, but I think maybe this will help you, because it was something that caught my ear as well when you were talking about a way for rad trads to kind of own Jesuits. And I know you said it's sort of tongue in cheek, but I think there's something there
oh yeah.
beyond the joke, right? I mean, I think there is a way to find that unity if we start to approach this situation with graciousness and charity, that approach that we mentioned earlier, where we're actually trying
Mhm.
to see, trying to actually believe that they have the best intentions in mind, assume orthodoxy, don't assume heterodoxy,
Yeah.
these types of things. And let's come alongside each other, embrace the similarities, and then work out the differences, excuse me, while we're kind of coming at it from that. I mean, I think that's a really
Yeah.
big game changer. Something that came up with my conversation with Austin Suggs, that I think he recommended, that, flipping the conversation so that we're on the same side of the table, not on opposite sides, like going after each
Mhm.
other, but on the same side of the table, studying together. I mean, that's kind of something that he offered that was really helpful just with respect to ecumenical dialogue more broadly. But I think it absolutely applies to any dialogue between groups that have disagreements. So that approach changes a lot, though. It goes back to that avoidance of tribalistic thinking, avoidance of
Mhm.
wartime mentality. And that doesn't mean you don't acknowledge the severity of a situation. It just means that you rise above it, that you acknowledge that we're committed to something else. We're pledged to a greater allegiance, and that has to take precedent over. And then that orders our priorities, right? When we remember our primary allegiance to Christ, everything else starts to come into focus, even if the disagreements remain. It doesn't mean like all kumbaya at the end of the day, but I mean, our souls will be in a lot better shape at the end of those
Yeah.
disagreements.
Yeah. Now I do remember what I was gonna talk about was actually, we all like to say, oh yeah, the Jesuits are a problem, blah blah blah. But there some of those Jesuits in Africa, like those are the guys that are like legitimately they could be martyred tomorrow.
Mm.
Uh, these guys are fearless, and I heard this story, and I'm not gonna say any specific names because I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but there was an African Jesuit priest who was visiting the U.S. and somehow got himself into this meeting with some parish church meeting, whatever. I don't know what it was. So the woman who was running the meeting was just like, "Okay, everyone, let's let's all talk about the biggest social justice issue that's facing our communities today. Mary Sue, why don't you go ahead?" Mm, it's the patriarchy. Oh, I'm so sorry, sister. Lisa, how about you? Mm, it's racism. Oh, such a tragic. Okay. Father from Africa, what's the biggest social justice issue facing your community? And he goes, witchcraft. And so it's just like these guys are dealing with real things down in
Right.
the trenches, more real than like what traditionalists in the US are dealing with today.
Right.
And so it's really not fair to throw an entire religious order that has produced many saints,
Right.
um, especially like some of the uh like the Institute of Christ the King. And this is just for like the Institute of Christ the King was founded in 1990, or maybe 1993, something like that. Okay, they haven't been around long enough to produce any saints. The Jesuits have produced many saints,
Right.
though there is something to be said that after a certain year, the canonizations kind of stopped. So, but yeah.
No, but I think I hear your point. And I mean, I think it all goes back to just that the reordering of approach, not viewing the other as the enemy, those who
Mhm.
disagree as those we must war against. It's interesting though. It's hard. Um, I mean, I find myself slipping into it, right? It's an insidious type thing. I think we talked about this earlier, right? Even in our
Mhm.
reactions to these overreactions, we can we can slip into it ourselves, even as we criticize others for doing the exact same thing. And that's one of the
Yeah.
vicious cycles about it. And it requires this constant examination and re-examination of conscience. And it
Yeah.
requires a lot of self-awareness, right? It requires a lot of self um honesty, I think an honest examination of conscience, and that's not easy to do
Mhm.
because it's
Right.
uncomfortable because it requires us
Yeah.
constantly admitting that we're I mean, what is that wonderful I mean, there's a lot of versions of it, but before communion, we say something like, in the Byzantine tradition, "Oh Lord, I believe and confess that you are truly Christ, the Son of the
Mhm.
living God, who came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the first." That's something that we say, always, during the
Mm.
Eucharistic blessing, portion of the
Yeah.
liturgy. And I know that I think the other liturgies have something similar, but it's just such a wonderful reminder that the sinners of whom I am the first, that Pauline reminder. I believe it was Paul talking about himself,
Yeah.
but certainly it's something that we all share and should be saying about ourselves, as Christians.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
So
man,
in the
is it
West, we
hard?
don't have that.
What's that?
Yeah. No, the West, we don't have that. We've got the Domine non sum dignus, which is, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof.
Oh, that's yeah.
Yeah. So,
The centurion
but
prayer, right? Isn't that the centurion in the
yes,
Bible? Yeah, I
yes,
love that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
wonderful as
but
well.
it's still true. Obviously, like it's just like we are not worthy, and
Mm,
and I think it's important to remember that line because it's so true. It's like we are not worthy. So whenever you're looking at your neighbor, it's like, well, he's not worthy. Yeah, he isn't either, but neither are you. So stay in your lane.
mm.
Um, and yeah, so that's yeah. So there's just so much that could be said on this, but I mean, I guess it's just like, so what is the cure for radical traditionalism? Sainthood.
Yeah.
And it's just like nobody wants to be a mad trad. Nobody wants to be like, there's not a single one of these churches, these angry traditionalists out there. There's not a single one of them out there that is actively trying to destroy the church.
Mm.
They are doing it out of, I would, they can push back on this and that's fine. But they are doing it out of a misplaced love for Jesus Christ and his church. And they are just they're putting the cart before the horse on a lot of these things, and not because they're being malicious, but because of original sin. And
Mm.
one of the consequences of original sin is darkening of the intellect, which is just a really nice way to say bless their heart. So yeah,
Yeah. No, I mean there is. I mean, I think it's tough. I mean, I never want to be one to judge, internal intentions, but it certainly does seem to be there's a hardening that occurs with time as you continue to entertain these types of radical leaning thoughts, and as you kind of continue to foment that rage inside you and constantly,
yeah,
inciting that anger. It does seem to be that there's a hardening that occurs. And I think that we've seen that in a lot of, and I certainly don't want to make this a hit piece. And I think we've been very fair, but if you see the thumbnail, right? I mean, I do have James Altman, Taylor Marshall, and Kennedy Hall up there because I think that they're in a lot of ways emblematic of what we're seeing in terms of these reactionary voices,
yeah,
as well as that hardening that I'm talking about. Because even in the few years that I've been Catholic, I've seen a shift. I've noticed an
hmm,
evolution in these men, and it's sad, but I think it speaks to the nature of sin, right? And it speaks to the nature of corruption and the
yeah,
lies that we talked about, right? And these are very smart, intelligent men, like you said, who are motivated by love for the church, who believe that their particular way is actually going to be something that's beneficial to the church, but in that belief, it fueled, I think, to some extent, at least by pride, or at least the disobedience that follows is fueled by pride, right? Because
yeah,
that's the challenge, right? It's okay to have that as long as it's kept in its proper place. But then when it becomes something else, and then you resist the the proper correction, that's when it starts to become this persistent disobedience. That's when it starts to become this prideful rejection of authority. And
Yeah.
that's an entirely different issue now from the original issue that may have sparked your righteous indignation. I think that's what people often miss, is that we're now talking about another moral problem here. And
Right.
you can keep pointing back to that initial reason that you got angry. For example, it's like, I'm mad at Pope Francis because he said this. And it's like, okay, fine. Like, we can address that. But now we're over here talking about like what you've done as a result of your anger. Right.
Hmm.
And that's an entirely separate, certainly connected, but that's a separate moral decision and a separate moral issue now. And I think that's where it gets really convoluted, right? Moral theology is not
Yeah.
this one-off thing where you have this blanket check mark that I'm in the right, and therefore everything that now happens is somehow vindicated. By no means. Like, that's an
Yeah.
absurd and completely contrary to Catholic moral theology. But it's
Yeah.
so easy to do, like for all of us to do, especially when we know we're in the right. And that's where it's tricky, right? Oh man. Yeah, what do you
Let
think?
let's bring it. Let's bring it. So yeah, I agree with everything you said there, but let's bring it to a little bit of an example. It's a little bit closer to home.
Yeah,
Most
yeah,
of us have
please.
siblings. Most of us have siblings. A lot of us have children. Whatever. So if you've been a parent, you're probably familiar with this. You walk into the living room, and there are your beautiful children.
Hmm.
That your wife had given her body to deliver, or especially if they adopted them. The beautiful creatures of God, and there they sit, beating their faces in, just absolutely just giving it to the other one, just absolutely just wailing at each other. And here you're sitting over there listening to the screams, the blood's flying everywhere. You stop it, stop it, stop it. And it's just like, what happened here? And then the first response is, he started it. Like, what? I
Yeah.
just, no, I don't care who started it. This is an inappropriate response. So, and you see, and oh my goodness. So, on the Council of Trent, Trent did a video talking about Father Altman. And my goodness, the number of comments that are basically, well, he started it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's just like, I can't even begin to respond to that, because it's just like, I need you to know that beating your little sister's face in because she drank from your chocolate milk is not
Yeah.
an appropriate reaction. You know, so yeah, yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
that
No, I
that you
think you're
got me
right.
on
I
a
think that
bad
is a
soapbox.
good. Well, I think it's a good example. I mean, I think that it's helpful to have those analogies to bring it a little bit closer to home, because I think it is a childish behavior. Um, and I think, though, now, because I want to qualify, because we've been critical, even though I think we've been fair about it. I think this does go back a little bit to acting out of a place of pain and hurt, right? Which we
Yeah,
talked about
absolutely.
earlier, right? They are genuinely hurt. There is a genuine problem, and it is
Oh yeah,
causing them genuine pain, and they're sincerely upset by it. So that's something I think that can be we need to be,
yeah,
and I'm not saying you're not doing this, right? I'm just sort of framing it for the audience
yeah,
and saying, I'm certainly not saying that you're saying the opposite or anything like that. But I think it's important to kind of validate that part of it, right? But now we're talking about like this next step. Okay, we're talking about after that festers, after that sits
hmm
and festers and boils
yeah,
over and builds, right? Because it never stays in that size. It never does. It always grows and builds and manifests unless it's stopped. Like, it doesn't really seem like there's this, like, I don't know. It's just interesting. Maybe that's the nature of sin, right? Once we start to give in to our anger and start to give in to these vices,
yeah,
or even if that vice is intemperance, right? Then we'll see a snowball effect in the worst possible sense.
yeah. And there's another factor too that we kind of haven't touched on in this yet, and that's also like parasocial relationships. Um, in particular, you see people. We kind of talked a little bit about like categorizing people because they said something that kind of sound like this, but at the end of the day, YouTube is a social media platform. We're so used to the man on the screen being some celebrity, and you and I, we can talk about George Clooney all we want.
I like George
George,
Clooney.
yeah, I mean, we could be talking about his Batman suit as much as we
Eh,
wanted.
That
you
less
know,
so.
yeah, exactly. We could lay out the worst, most vile criticisms against him, and he would never know about it, or nor rightly so would he ever care.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, that is not YouTube. The creator, even if they've got a channel of like, 500,000 subscribers or whatever, the creators are they're seeing these comments. So a lot of times you have these people, we think of this idea of, because we're so used to the man on the screen being so far away, so untouchable, that we can just do whatever we want. So a lot of these comments are just straight up abusive. And I'm guilty of this
Yeah.
too. This isn't like, oh, you faceless trolls out there are a problem. No, Kyle Whittington's also a problem. Um, and it's something that we all need to repent of, something we all need to work on.
Mm.
Um, but because of that, some creators kind of has this they get a twisted view too, because we're talking about that abuse and trauma and acting out of that. um, it affects how they conduct themselves too. And if a creator doesn't have a community around them too, that's also can do really bad things. So the whole parasocial relationships is also a massive problem. And it's kind of obvious that, like, while we shouldn't be hiding our faith online, obviously I think that the church has been able to make gain massive gains thanks to the internet. You
Yeah.
and I would have never met had it not been for the
Yeah.
internet.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, and but at the same time, the faith was not meant to be lived out solely online.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yes, it's good that you're making friends, you're building relationships, and you're evangelizing online. However, you really, really, really need to go touch grass.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
if you're rebuking your neighbors online, which I try, and maybe I'm wrong for doing this. I try to listen to criticisms. I try to give them a fair shot, because I know that I'm not perfect, and sometimes you get really good feedback.
Mm.
Most of the time it's completely worthless. Um, you know, it's at Counselor Trent, the moment that a comment turns into an accusation, I just stop reading. But you know, stop doing that and start loving. Like, what's your next door neighbor's name? You
Mm.
know, how many kids do they have? How old are their kids?
Yeah.
You know, are they a Christian? Do they go to church? When was the last time you talked to them? When was the last time you did something nice for them?
Mm.
And I'm legitimately, like, the reason why I bring up these questions is because I'm guilty, like, on all of those. Because, like, while I know the neighbor on this side, I legitimately actually have no idea what this guy's name is. And he's never there. So, but like, that's a failure on my part. I could have gotten to know my actual next door neighbor, and I just never did for the 3 years that I've lived here. Now we're moving,
Yeah.
so it's just like, whatever. But yeah, so it's just like, stop just LARPing online, you know, and go out and, like, live the faith and bring Jesus Christ to the people around you, and don't just try to dunk on people on Twitter or on YouTube or whatever. So yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I think it's an extremely practical way to resist radicalism. I mean, I mean that quite
Mhm.
sincerely. I mean, I think within all of us, right? I think one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you about this subject is because I know that you and I both are tradition lovers, and I think we both are extremely passionate people who can get intense about things, right? So I think in a lot of senses we are the types of people who can be radicalized, right? And I think that there's something
Yeah.
interesting about that. I'm certainly self-aware enough about myself, and I don't want to accuse you of that, but I think I can definitely say it about
Yeah.
myself, and I think I can probably say it about you. I think I know you well enough at this point.
Yeah.
Um, or at least you can understand how one could get to that point, right? You
Oh,
can imagine
absolutely.
that step before it. Even if you don't take that next step, you can definitely imagine yourself being on that platform right before it, eyeing that step, and whatever that means for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Um,
I mean, I
yeah.
remember whenever I first started getting into the Latin mass scene, I I never considered myself like remotely tempted to go Sede Vacantis. there was a time that like I'd noticed that I was heading in that direction, and that did concern me, because I started to go like, okay, well, there was a time where I thought like you could really only trust like 15 priests in this country, and I was lucky enough to have like 3 of them in my backyard. And that's not a good way to live the faith at all, and
Mm,
that's never something that Jesus Christ would have intended for us. So, the moment that you start trying to fit the faith in a little box, I call it homebrew Catholicism, where it's just
mm,
like you came
yeah.
up with this mixture, and anything outside of your little homebrew edition isn't real Catholicism. It's like that's a problem, and I guess I guess I'll go ahead and stroke a few egos here by saying like, and if you're on the smarter side of things, it's really easy to do that, because if you're
Mm,
accustomed to being smarter than most of the people around you, it's really easy to think, oh well, I'm not going to be fooled. I can find the real stuff, and yeah, so it's be careful of that, and just focus on what the church teaches. Don't dogmatize your opinions, because I've seen this in people around me that it seems that their definition of tradition is just whatever they like. You
mm,
know, they dogmatize their opinions on how people should dress, and yet they have a Twitter account.
yeah.
And it's just like, okay, first off, the church didn't dogmatize the fact that a man should always be wearing dress shoes and a tie. Um, that's a you thing. It's like, oh, but it's traditional. It's like, no, you just like dressing up, which there's
Right.
nothing wrong with that, but it's not required. And then yet at the same time, like, you've got a Twitter account. So what, like there's a disconnect there. It's like, oh, well, if I like it, then it's traditional. And the moment that you've decided that you are the arbiter of tradition, you are in very dangerous waters, and you need that's a problem that's been identified, and you need to do something about it.
You're absolutely right. And I think you brought up another really interesting distinction with respect to tradition, and that's the conflation of capital T tradition and small t traditions, right?
Mhm.
Because there certainly is being a traditionalist. So there's church tradition in the sense that the oral components of the deposit of faith, but then there's also the particular traditions that comprise the church's practices and those types of things. And then within even kind of below those, there's various sort of preferential practices that various people can take. So I think it's just a really interesting thing. Not interesting. It's really important to keep those lines drawn between the categories of tradition, because I think in the description, the allegory that you just mentioned about the person who really likes traditionally dressed people, he's considering tradition in sort of an American go to church, traditional American family sense, right? And then he's sort of conflating that American
Mhm.
traditional family visual with church tradition, and then being a traditionalist is following church tradition, and then somehow being a like suit wearing person who really obsesses over what shoes everyone's
Mhm.
wearing is being a traditional Catholic. And before you know it, you're creating all of these different layers on what it means to be a traditional Catholic. Whereas maybe it's just that traditional Catholic is this part, and then the rest of it are simply preferential
Yeah.
practices and those types of things. And maybe that's a bad example, right? I'm trying to speak very broadly so people can apply it
Yeah.
where they will. But I think it's just important to keep those lines in place and recognize what is preference and what is principle. Yeah,
Yeah. I do want to, since we are live and we do have people in the live chat, I do want to just kind of remind everybody, like, if y'all got questions, we are kind of like paying attention. So,
yeah, very much.
feel free to throw those up. Now there was, yeah. So let's see here. I don't know. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have. It's funny. So I have all these questions, none of which I've
Uh-huh.
asked actually, but we've touched on all of them, which is why I haven't asked them. So it's not because I
Okay.
wouldn't have. I would have
Fantastic.
stopped you. Don't worry. I know how to. I can be insert myself if I need to. But we just have
Yeah.
actually organically addressed all of them, and that's one of the reasons I frame these as a conversation. I can guide the conversation as much as I need to,
Mhm.
but I actually prefer it when it becomes a bit more organic. Probably because so many of my other videos are so scripted, and this is a nice break from that for me to actually have a live organic discussion where I can play
Oh
with
yeah,
ideas and kind of tease them out and get feedback in live form. So,
yeah,
but yeah, no, thank you for mentioning that about the comments. I definitely would love any questions. We've got a lot of wonderful comments. Yeah, thank you all for joining. I'm reading all of the comments. I know I haven't said hi to everyone in person, but hi to everyone
yeah.
who has come. It is wonderful to see everyone. Really, really it is. Like I'm
I
focused
I
so
would
much
just
on producing the show that sometimes I forget to express like how much I'm happy that people are actually here and watching it because I'm so hyper focused on production mode and also having a conversation with you that there's almost no brain space. But y'all, I hope you know that
yeah.
yeah, it doesn't betray my
Oh hey,
yeah.
Dom's here.
Oh, sweet. Hey,
So
Dom.
what
And
devotionals do you
David is
guys
so much smarter
prefer?
than prettier than everyone. Sorry. What were you reading? Oh, important. There we go.
Yeah,
I'm
so
at it.
the Logos Project, Dom Dalmaso's in the chat. He says, "What devotionals do you guys prefer?" I'll let you go first on that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can't help but think now of Saint Francis de Sales again, just because we were talking about that, and I don't know if it counts as a proper devotional, but I was talking earlier, maybe before you were here, Dom, about Roses Among Thorns by him, and it is a devotional collection of spiritual guidance, really, written in short form fashion. It's almost like a precursor to a collection of tweets, a tweet storm. So that's something that's just been on my mind a lot because I've gone back to it a lot. But if you're talking more like in a proper like um, prayer devotional, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a big, I don't know if I have it. I wasn't prepared with my visuals. I'm a big fan of the Orthodox prayer book that I use, kind of with respect to the Eastern
Yeah,
Catholic parish I go to. I'm my theological practice and orientation and the way I think about the expressions of the truths of the Catholic Church are very Eastern in terms of the holy mysteries and the focus on the Jesus prayer being the center of effectively all of Christian life is kind of built around this desert fathers monastic concept of the Jesus prayer, right? So it's always about this humble prayer of penitence, of repentance, and then everything else basically is built around that, like the entire liturgy and the entire body of the Eastern Church. So I know I just answered in a way bigger way than you mean, but
yeah,
all of that, all of Eastern Christianity.
yeah. So I guess devotional. So with Life with Five Kids is a little chaotic, especially since the fifth one's so new. It's like I gotta readjust. But I'm a big fan of the Rosary. It's nothing unique. It's nothing. I I don't know. Like it's nothing that nobody's gonna write a biography about me because I pray the Rosary. But I really like it. Meditating on the mysteries is very helpful. It's a really good way to do that. Another thing, I really like reading The Imitation of Christ.
Mm,
Um, one of the thing it I know like one of the criticisms of The Imitation of Christ is like, scrupulosity, blah 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 blah. But I think that it's actually made me it's made confession easier for me
mm,
because I after reading that book, just the first few paragraphs, I realized that yes, my sins are great. Yes, they are they're way worse than I thought they were. But at the same time, this guy in what the was it the 14th century was writing about my sins that I struggle with today. So yes, my sins are big, but they're not interesting.
mm.
Satan doesn't have any new tricks. Like it's the same old tricks. It's just in a different skin. So whenever you go to confession, I promise you, like the devil's boring. You know,
Yeah,
God is interesting. God makes all things new. Satan's old and washed up.
yeah.
So yeah, like my sins, they're not interesting. And yeah,
I love that you brought up confession because I could talk about favorite devotions probably for an entire live stream. I don't know. Dom asked a question. I'm like, we could just go on this for forever. But I think leaning into confessional practices, these acts of repentance, these rites of repentance, and really taking advantage of the graces offered to us, in particular through the mystery of repentance, the sacrament of reconciliation, however we want to call it. It's someone who converted to Catholicism relatively late in life, full of myriad attachments to sin. I, out of necessity, had to utilize it quite a bit, especially, towards the beginning, when I first became Catholic after not living like a Christian. You can imagine that was quite an adjustment, or not like, oh, hey, I think
It's
my
okay.
camera,
We
you can
yeah,
still
but
hear me.
yeah, we still it's okay. We got tired of listening to your well, looking at your face. We can still listen to your face though.
That is funny. Well, I will try to, let's see.
There you and
Whoops.
you're back.
But I'm like in the wrong place. That's funny. All right.
All right,
Hey,
haha,
look
we're
at
both
that.
on our desktop cameras now.
There we go. How do we like that? I guess my I don't know, my camera either overheated or it died. That's only happened one other time, I think, with Derek, and I'm not really sure why, because I've gone longer than this before. But
That's
the
funny.
audio sounds good.
Yeah, you're fine.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool,
everything sounds
awesome.
good.
Well, hey, good for Ecamm. But I completely lost my train of thoughts. I don't know who was answering or what. That
Yeah, so
completely
we're talking
derailed me.
devotionals. I do want to say something real quick.
Yeah,
It's like
please.
it's called X now. First off, it's not called X until X.coms become more than just a redirect to Twitter.com. Um, but then Retrocalypse. Sorry that I butchered that. He's just like, as bad as my sins are, I hope God's mercy is bigger. I'm not a very good Catholic. It's like, well, I can assure you, God's mercy is bigger. It just look at the cross. I mean, Jesus Christ, God went to the cross and died, like suffered and died for you. Um, that's how big that mercy is. Like sometimes whenever you we can get so normalized, like we can look at the crucifix and we can think, oh yeah, it's kind of mundane at this point. But like it is really kind of amazing to like just the magnitude of God going to a cross for us and dying. One of the most painful and just unimaginable deaths possible. And he did that for you. So, this is what God's mercy looks like. You know,
Mm,
Jesus Christ is not a stupid spender. He knew
mm.
exactly what he was doing. So, trust me, your sins are not worse than this.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. And Chris just said in the chat, no sin is too big for God's infinite mercy. Yeah. Amen to that as well. Um, I mean, I think that's just such a powerful way. Wow, it's so interesting that we've come full circle with this, because I can't help but connect this back to what we've been talking about the entire night, and that posture of humility that is in itself a mechanism for resisting radicalization in ourselves, right? When we're drawn to those things, and how much of that points us back to a properly ordered life centered in repentance, centered in our constant awareness of our own sinfulness, right? That you keep talking about. And it's just such a wonderful and beautiful thing, because in so many ways, maybe that is the cure all, right? If pride is the source of all sin, then humility is the solve to it,
Yeah.
right? So that would make sense.
I don't remember the name of the saint that said it, but you will find every single virtue in hell. You will
Mm,
find charity in hell. You will find, they're the worst people have loved. You'll find honesty in hell. You will not find humility in hell, though. That is the one virtue that is completely absent from hell.
mm.
So, if you really want to be a saint, grow in humility. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, here's how you grow in humility. You get humiliated.
Mm.
So, your pride's got to die, and that is I can speak personally, like even like very recently. So that is a painful process, and the more you want to the more you want to hold on to it, the more it's gonna hurt. So
Yeah. Oh man, no, I feel that a lot, and I feel like God is constantly chipping away at me. I keep resisting him, but he keeps trying, which I'm grateful for, to be sure. But yeah, no, pride is it is incredibly insidious the way it impacts us, and I think that you hit the nail on the head with respect to the other virtues, how the other virtues can be present, but if that pride sneaks in, that starts to move the target away from them being grounded in love, which kind of points us back to the scriptural passage talking about if you have the knowledge of all matters of theology and all the world and yada yada yada, but have no love, it amounts to nothing. I think that kind of in a lot of ways points us back to that, right? Because if pride is the motivation, if pride is what it's all grounded in, it's going to skew everything else, even if it has the appearance of virtue, even if it is tangentially related to virtue,
Yeah.
because it skews the whole, it shifts the entire order of the motivation. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
Yeah.
just it's interesting. I think I come back to that so much, right? And so many of moral theological topics come back to the necessity to reground our life in God. The reminder
Yeah.
that we are a created being in need of a savior. I mean, that essential gospel message. That's why I'm kind of chuckling to myself. It's just because so many times I feel like I have these hour and a half long conversations and I come back to the point where I'm like, I'm a miserable sinner and I need to say the Jesus prayer a lot more.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's an, painting in broad strokes, but oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to like the resisting radicalism, as much of a lame answer as it is, it's like, oh, easier said than done. It's like virtue.
Yeah.
Virtue is the response. Like Jesus Christ is the answer to this. And it's just, try not to do it your way. Try to do it the way that, the saints have laid out before us. Do it the
Yeah.
traditional way, and don't go off and do your own thing.
Mm.
One of the things that I find is really helpful is finding the genesis of certain ideas. So, like, especially as Americans, we have this tendency to believe things like, we kind of mentioned on it earlier, of like, I can recall my bishop.
Mm.
I can write petitions, I can write letters, and we can get our bishop removed.
Yeah.
When in reality, no. I'm very, I go to the Institute of Christ the King. I'm a big fan of the social kingship of Christ. Christ is king now and forever.
Mm.
And that authority comes down.
Yeah.
Not it doesn't come from the people. He's Christ the King, not Christ the president.
Right.
Um,
Right. We're
he
not
doesn't merely
congregationalists.
preside.
Yeah.
We did not elect him.
Mm-hmm.
He was king when we were born. He will be king when we die. And basically, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's
Yeah.
nothing that I can do, that you can do, that will make Christ not king. It is just a fact of life. Deal with it. So in that regard, kind of like, Pope Francis, doing all this, Pope Francis is the vicar of Christ.
Yeah.
Deal with it. For better or worse, that is the case. And it's we just got to work with what we have here on earth. Pope Francis will admit this, and I don't think it's unfair to say this, is like, he is a sinner and he's going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And, and that's why we need to pray for him, because especially as like the leader, the pastor of the entire world, of every man alive today on earth, he has the single biggest responsibility on his shoulders.
Yeah.
So be traditional, pray, fast for the Pope, get a picture of him, hang it up in your house as a reminder to pray for him.
Yeah. That's a great reminder. Wow. I mean, that's actually a great practical step. I mean, if you're really struggling to love Pope Francis, if you are finding yourself full of resentment, you just are struggling to see how this all connects. I mean, that would be a beautiful way, I think, to offer that up to God, right? Get a picture of him and commit to praying for him. I mean, I mean that sincerely. That's not like me saying that like a challenge, like a haha. Like, I mean, seriously, like challenge yourself to do it. Like, it's not so that you agree with him at the end of it, but like, so you prayed for them every day for however long that you do it. I mean, that's beautiful and wonderful and good in of itself. I love that. That's a great practical step that we could all take, I think. That visible reminder. Mm.
And you know what? And this is like, well, I don't know if I need to go that far. Let me just put this challenge out there to you. If you have ever looked up the age of the Pope, and then the very next Google search looked up how old the oldest Pope was when they died, you need to get a picture of Pope
Yeah.
Francis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, because I've been guilty of that. It's just like, what did he say? Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to deal with this for weeks. It's gonna be
Yeah.
awful. It's just like, when is that old man just gonna die? It's just like, okay, that's a lack of charity.
Yeah.
This is something, and this is just like, instead of hoping for his death, I need to be praying for the Holy Spirit to fill him with His grace, and so that way he can lead the church for the salvation of as many souls. And you know what? I learned actually um, of a pope today, because I was just looking at a list of popes today, and just for some reason I was actually I was looking up the pope's age, and like, is if he is the oldest pope yet, which by the
Yeah.
way he's not. He's like he's top 10,
He's
but
getting
he's
close.
yeah, I think he's like the seventh oldest that we've ever had.
Okay. All
But
right.
the one that stuck out to me though was the youngest pope who ever died. Pope John the 11th was 25 years old whenever he died. Arguably the worst pope in history.
Was this
Uh,
a super immoral guy that had the demon something he would call the like Bacchus for his sex orgies?
no, I didn't read any of that.
Oh, sorry
However,
guys, let me just scandalize you some more. There was also one of those.
yeah, yeah. So, one of the things that I heard was, or that I was reading about, is that yes, he was the pope, but his mother was really in charge. So his
Mm,
mom was calling the shots. And so it's Pope John the 11th. You can look him up. And he was a puppet until his parents were like kicked out of Rome, and then his brother, the emperor, then became the real guy that was in charge, whatever. And he was elected to the papacy at 21 years old, and he died at 25. So it's just
wow.
like, oh my goodness. And could you imagine? Could you imagine if we had that pontificate today in today's media? If a woman was really in charge of the church, that would be, my goodness, that would be awful.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think you brought up a great point is the role of the media. My wife and I were talking about that not long ago, saying how we thought that John Paul II would have been, skewered almost as much as Pope Francis has been, if he were Pope during this exact time. And then, of course, you go back even further, and I think the more could be said about even more. And that's not trying to say, I'm not trying to equivocate like John Paul II with Pope Francis. I know there's lots of like
yeah.
important distinctions. My emphasis is only on the way that media highlights the negative and then blows it out, and then the algorithm feeds you stuff that enrages you, so you keep seeing the stuff that makes you mad, and then before you know it, the only thing that you think is actually happening is the stuff that makes you mad, but it's not. But it's a
Yeah.
frequency that's artificially factored in because of what you're actually engaging with. So it's just this
Yeah.
weird kind of vicious cycle. But all I could think about when you were talking about Pope Francis is how easy it is. And this goes back to something you mentioned earlier about needing to have our, I don't know how you worded it, but have our feet on the grass more, get offline.
Touch some
Basically.
grass.
Yeah, touch the grass.
Yeah.
There we go. It's really easy to create caricatures of real people when we see and experience them only online, or when our experiences
Mhm.
of them are filtered entirely through online media. And of course, I'm thinking now in particular of Pope Francis, but I'm thinking this applies to all of us, right? I mean, anyone that has the target on their back for whatever reason, for you,
Yeah.
and it's so easy to kind of slip into that. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. There was something to be said about, how many of you have read things that Pope Francis has said, but have never heard his actual voice? You know,
Yeah. I've
if I
only heard a
gave you,
few times, to be honest with you. A couple Angeluses and like
yeah. Oh, and it was crazy to me too, how,
Angeli.
because I mean, the Pope, he's not a native English speaker, so he's not used to speaking
Right,
English, so it
right,
makes more sense to just read translations.
right.
Um, I was at Seek 23 earlier this year because it was in St. Louis, and in the video, and you could probably find this on YouTube, announcing where it was going to be for Seek 24, which, surprise, surprise, is going to be in St. Louis again. And there was an old man talking with a very thick Eastern European accent, and I was just like, huh. Why are they who's this guy talking? And then they like flash to it, and it's Pope John Paul II reading, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I've never heard his voice before. So like,
Yeah, good
you
point.
know, you're talking about like listening to through filters and stuff like that. Like, could you even point his voice out in a lineup?
Well, and
You
he's
know,
not tweeting, right? I mean, it's not him physically
no,
tweeting.
of course not. He's
Someone's
not on
tweeting on
Twitter.
his behalf, but we have this online caricature of him. We have an avatar of Pope Francis. Now, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not. That's not really the point. The point is simply that it's an avatar and that it's being filtered. So there's at
Yeah.
least the chance that it's being obscured, right? So I think we have to be mindful of that. And it's so hard because I think you mentioned this earlier when we talk about how terrible we can be to each other online. We wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be that awful to almost anyone in real life, in person. I mean,
Yeah.
very rarely would a situation merit the type of responses that we give. Um, and in real life, I think we often do find ourselves willing to give the benefit of the doubt when we're actually face to face with someone, when we're seeing
Yeah.
someone in real life. It's interesting, but for whatever reason, when it's online, it's you take away the humanity of it. You focus only on the actions. They're stripped down into their just pure, is it good or is it bad? And everything is just blown up. It's interesting. It really does change things, though.
So, you're a movie guy, so you'll
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah.
this. So let's talk about Star Wars for a second,
Yeah, sure.
or G.I. Joe, or Halo, or let's see here,
I like
what
all of
else?
those.
We could talk about, you know, various different things. What do all the bad guys have in common? They don't have faces.
Mm,
The stormtroopers, they do not have human faces. They have these helmets on. The Cobra, forces, whatever, in GI
good
Joe,
point.
they
Yeah.
they don't have faces. Halo, they're not humans. They're aliens. You can slaughter them by the millions, and it doesn't matter.
Orcs too, right?
Orcs, Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings, it doesn't matter. They're not human. So you can kill them. It's okay. It's not a crime. So that's kind of how our minds process these things of like, you feel bad when you see the human die, but whenever you kill the stormtrooper
Right.
or the Nazi or the terrorist, that's okay. Um, so the same thing kind of happens online, especially because, like I'll use Veritas for an example. I'm pretty sure his profile picture is a V, and I know for a fact that Veritas is not his real name. Had I not met him in person, he would just be some faceless troll,
Truth.
honestly. And because he's not a person, he's a faceless troll, he can just I can be mean to him. I can be horrible to him because he's not a human. He's just text on a screen. And as if we're not consciously thinking about this, God gave us instincts for a reason. Some of these instincts that God gave us to survive in the real world do not translate well into online.
Mm.
So, that's what's happening here. And yeah, so it's just like remember the human. Remember the human here.
That's powerful, though, the visual symbolism there, the nameless, faceless enemies, right? And a lot of the people that you mentioned, the groups that you mentioned, are also nameless. I know not all of them, right? Some of them do have names if we really dig in. But yeah, also Shepard has mentioned the Dementors. I think of the ring race, the Nazgul, like all of these examples. And I know that if you go really into the lore, there are names for them, but practically speaking, these are these nameless, faceless. Their names have been removed. Their names have been forgotten. Their faces have been removed, and they're just these dehumanized shells of their former
Yeah.
selves.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, I could really nerd out over the symbolism in that, but I think there's a lot to be said that between what we just described, how we describe those enemies in these symbolic senses, and how we
Mm.
make out people in the online world when we have this tribalistic, extreme, reactionary type tendency. We turn them into those nameless, faceless enemies, and it's easy to do online. So easy to do,
Yeah.
and at scale, which makes it even scarier.
Yeah. Dom brings up something. Same thing with cars and road rage. Like you're mad at that stupid
Mm,
blue car,
yeah.
or that moron in the white truck, or something. I don't know. I hope I described at least one of you in the chat. Um, I do see something. Rich Rocklips, you're in here talking about. It's been a while since you've been to confession. I did want to just throw this piece of advice out there. If it's been over a year since your last confession, I would highly recommend making an appointment.
Mm.
Because especially if you go to a parish where like they've only got like confession for like 30 minutes, there's a more than decent chance that your confession is going to take that entire amount of time. So um, the parish office might be open on a Saturday. If not, call on Monday. Set up an appointment for confession, so that way you can go and you can have more of a conversational general confession. And that way you can, you know, because that's sacramentally helpful and also helpful on like a practical, natural level as well. So that is your homework: is that by close of business on Monday, you need to have an appointment set up for your next confession at least. So anyway, all right. So sorry, I wanted to make that piece of advice there.
No, I think that's a great advice. Great advice to give, and I actually think there's a lot of benefit, not only to the convenience factor and the fact that you're giving the priest the ability to kind of plan and kind of account for all that, but I think also for you as the person going to confession, there's a great benefit I think of having that dedicated time. You're much more likely to get more hands-on spiritual direction in those types of situations, especially because you're expressing that context. So I would actually say that it'd just be a much more positive all-around experience as well, and just kind of adding on to what Kyle said and echoing it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's beautiful, and I think for me, maybe just it's still the convert zeal, but for me, the confession I think is still perhaps I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say my favorite sacrament because that would be terrible. I can't say that, but like the most impressive or the most shocking or the most surprising. Maybe that's what it is. The most surprising sacrament of all of them. I didn't expect to fall so much in love with the sacrament of reconciliation. I used to view it very negatively. I came from a Calvinistic background, so I
Right.
viewed sinfulness very much in terms of total depravity. I can't really change who I am. I just have these sort of tendencies ingrained in
Hmm.
me. So to kind of completely turn that on its head, with the Catholic worldview, the sacramental worldview, the concept of sacramental reconciliation is just wonderful. So, yeah, I think that's a great, that's probably a great, oh man, we are well over time, aren't we? We'll wrap it up. I think that might be a great way to, that's another great practical bit of advice, I think, to give
Yeah.
people. So Kyle, we've talked a lot about, I think the general situation in terms of sort of the nature of radicalism, how to resist it, how we as
Hmm.
Christians are called to a higher standard. We've talked a lot about reordering our priorities, and then we've talked a lot about offering up our suffering to God. I know what we didn't talk about a lot is actually the particulars of the situation going on, but I think that's okay, right? What we talked about earlier is there's lots of people doing that, and typically when I say these things, I want to have conversations that aren't being had. I don't want to just add to them.
Yeah.
So I hope that this is a helpful thing, and maybe we can include links to something for like contextual background if someone wants some. But I think people who are on the inside will know what's going on with the
Check
synods
out
that are
my channel
valid
with
and
Father
everything.
John
But
Brown.
yeah, no, let's link that. I'll actually add that
Yeah.
to the description. You can remind me, hold me to that if I forget tonight. But yeah, I'd love to add that. That'd be great context to give people.
Yeah. I guess, let me just add one thing on that is that, we are supposed to be living not of this world, and the times that we live in are of this world.
Mm.
So stop focusing so much on the times and focus on the eternities, because the times will bog you down. So, yeah, we kind of mentioned a little bit of the present situation and whatnot, but I want this conversation to be relevant now. I want it to be relevant next year. I want it to be relevant, 30 years from now, whenever, we have, Pope Francis III, and he has said his, latest, confusing statement, or whatever. Uh, what have you? I want these conversations to be uh, a little timeless, and probably failed miserably, but that is the goal here. And I don't focus so much on the times, focus on the eternities.
No, I think that's a great reminder and a great way to frame this entire thing, because the chaos, the crises, they'll come and go, but these principles remain the same. And I think that's maybe one of the grounding principles for our entire approach to this situation. And I think why there is reason to be at peace. The church has survived worse crises before. The church will continue to face crises, but the promise is not that the church will not face these crises. The promise is not that the church will not have times of chaos. It's that God will not abandon us during that time. The Holy Spirit remains with the church, guiding her, and there's a lot of peace to be had. There's a lot of hope to rest in. Right? There's never despair is of the devil. I mean, if there's anything I can leave people with, I mean, and it has to be, because it's the opposite of hope. I mean, etymologically, despair is literally devoid of hope. It's like despair. It's like the opposite. The privation of hope is despair. Like it's God is not causing you to despair. So if you find yourself just constantly anxious and agitated and angry and not at peace and leaning into despair, you can know that that is not something that is sourced in God, because God doesn't source despair. He is a source of hope. And that doesn't mean it's this kind of cheap hope, right? It doesn't mean this flimsy hope that requires us to just sit back and do nothing. No, it's a hope that compels us to action. But we don't need to lose our peace, and it's hard. But I think if we lean into Christ and kind of lean into these practical things and this reordering that we talked about, there is a way. And I don't do it every day. I do it really poorly most of the time, but I get glimpses of it every once in a while.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I will say that you do in fact suck. I'm great.
That's the part
No,
you're agreeing with.
yeah, no, but no, it's just like no. Okay, they every single like have you met you? You're awful. Like, and it's like the
Yeah.
ubiquitous you,
No, I don't know.
not
It
specifically
applies,
no
man. It
Reed.
applies.
And and that is something that really did give me a lot of peace a
Mm.
long time ago. It was actually whenever Derek was it was after Derek had appeared on Pints with Aquinas, and Matt confessed to Father Jason Sharon that he's just like, man, while I was talking to Derek, like I was really hoping that orthodoxy was true. And one of the reflections that Matt shared with us was that, like, I understand that the temptation is to run away to a church that's pure,
Hmm.
run away to a church that's sinless. But have you met you? You're awful. If you found that church, you would ruin it by joining it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's just like, yep, we suck and we need God's grace. And one of if it wasn't for all these filthy sinners, I would be a saint. So yeah, whenever you're doing all that, it says like, yeah, you're a mud person, yeah, you're in the mud with the rest of us. We suck. We all have to go to confession,
Yeah.
and that's it is just what it is. Shut up, Haley. I'm not mean. But sorry, that felt really bad to say. I'm
No, it's
sorry.
okay.
I'm
She already
sorry.
called me awful and called Veritas a troll, so it's good. If
Yeah,
you're somewhat vindicated if people look right. She started it, right? Yeah, there we go.
yeah.
There
She
we go. How,
started it.
how we go
Yeah,
about following our own advice.
yeah.
No, but it's interesting. And I think maybe that is a really helpful way to sum up a lot of what we're talking about tonight in terms of our recommendations for practical ways to resist that tendency towards radicalization. It's when we identify those problems, when we um, in our response to the chaos, in our response to the crises, I think the two things that we should focus on is ourself, right? We've talked a lot about working on ourself, like looking inwardly, examining our own consciences, our own privations, seeing where we can work, kind of seeing how we can work on ourselves. And then I think we've also talked a lot about seeing how we can give back to others. How can we serve our parish? How can we serve those around us? How can we pray for Pope Francis? Whether we think he's leading the church in a great direction or a terrible direction. How do we kind of take those practical steps, both in terms of examining and improving ourselves and also loving and giving back to others more? And then, I mean, I don't want to say it's a magic bullet, but I have a hard time believing there's going to be a lot of time left in your day for being angry. And if there is, like, turn off your smartphone, like stop looking at the news. I mean, if it
Yeah.
really is still a problem, like if your day is filled up with good things and it's still a problem, then cut off the bad. And maybe you should cut off the bad first. I mean, maybe that's another way of
Yeah.
looking at it. If you really need to, but thinking more in an ideal sense, I mean, I don't think you have to cut off the bad. I think we can respond to the bad appropriately. I think we can identify
Yeah.
bad as bad and then respond without letting it lead us to sin, right? Because the Bible talks about
Yeah.
anger, and it talks about anger that does not lead to sin and anger that does lead to sin. And there certainly are
Yeah.
distinctions made within that. But how do we discern that? It's not simply why are we angry? That's not the like only measurement of therefore it's good or therefore it's bad. No, it's much more layered. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's one of those. How many times have you lamented on Pope Francis's mistakes, but neglected to do a daily examination of conscience?
Yeah.
Like, I know all of Pope Francis's sins, and I know exactly what he needs to do. Yeah, but where did you screw up today? You
Yeah.
know, believe it or not, it's I always say it with a kind of tongue in cheek. Is like you can have all the correct opinions, but who cares? Like,
Yeah.
who cares about your stupid correct opinions? Yes, you might have the most brilliant. If Pope Francis does all of these things, he's going to fix every problem in the church, and he's going to be canonized the day after he dies.
Mm.
Cool. But how did you treat your wife today? You
Yeah.
know, did you pray? Is there some good that you left undone today? You
Ah,
know, and it's just like, what failures did you have today? Those are the questions that you really need to be considering,
mm.
especially if you're a father, or husband or father, because it's just like, okay, the impact that you have on your children is by far going to be the biggest impact that you have on the church,
Yeah.
probably,
And
unless
the
you're somebody
world
like,
by
yeah.
extrapolation, really.
Yeah. So and it's just like, actually, I was about to say unless you're somebody like Scott Hahn, but no. I don't even believe that. As much as he has done, I promise you. I've heard him talk about. This was the most emotional that I've ever heard a father talk about his son. Whenever he was talking about the ordination of my friend Father Jeremiah, and he's just like, my son has now been given the power to turn just
Mm.
simple bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus Christ. He's like, that's bigger than everything, anything that I've ever done. And so, like, for that, it's just like, hey, y'all,
Yeah.
quit trying to number Pope Francis's sins and try to weed out your own. It's
Yeah.
there's something about pulling the plank out of your eye before the beam out of your eye before you go for the splinter in your brother's. So
Yeah.
there's
Wow.
a lot of wisdom there. It's probably a really really smart guy who wrote that one.
Maybe even inspired. Um,
Yeah.
No, no, it reminds me that what you were just saying. It reminds me so much of my favorite Ascension video ever is the '99 series, the one they did on before I was there, so I can't say we, but the one that they did on about Father Mike and confession. It was the very highly produced one, but it reminds me a lot of the story that you were just telling because I guess his father was a doctor. And he was talking
Mm,
about how his hands had healed all these people, but you, my son, as a priest, like your hands, you're gonna heal people's souls, and like how
yeah.
I've healed. He was making the comparison, like how he's healed bodies with his hands,
Mhm.
and how you, my son, are gonna heal souls. And it was just such a beautiful thing, and it's true. I mean, it's Father Mike. It was like Father Mike sharing about his dad telling to him.
Yeah.
Like, so if you want to go cry tonight, go watch that. It's the '99 on Ascension Presents. I'll probably try to link all these. I've talked about so many videos I'm going to link. I have to now remember to link all of these videos. But the Ascension Presents the '99 Confession is a gift, I believe, or Confession is a blessing. One of those two
Yeah.
titles. So, oh,
Yeah.
and Roberto, great to see you. I'm really glad you're here. That's awesome. Roberto has been one of my loyalists who I'm very appreciative of. He's been
Ooh,
showing
nice.
up showing up regularly and being really kind. So Roberto,
Yeah.
thank you. Um,
Eh, okay,
yeah,
you know what? We could go all
we
night
could.
if we go on random tangents and whatnot. So I should just zip it and let you close this out.
Yeah, no, I mean, so well, before I just give you a minute to talk about what you're working on, is there anything else that you want to just leave the audience with? People who have been listening, people who um, might appreciate what we're saying but are still confused. Yeah, what do you just want
Yeah.
to say to people in kind of in closing?
Well, okay, so check out my channel, Kyle Whittington. It's okay. Um, and yeah, I'm not really working on any big projects right now. The biggest project that we're doing is we're moving to Steubenville.
Hmm.
So hey, actually Thursday, the more commonly, might know him as the producer from Pints of Aquinas. He and I have been talking quite a bit. We want to do some pretty cool stuff together. At least I think it's kind of cool. So hey, if you want to really freak out Thursday, if you've made it this far in the video, go subscribe to his channel. Um, which is impossible to find. I've tried to get him
I
to
was
change
gonna
his channel
say
name.
I am a subscriber, but I can't tell you what it is. Like
It's
Thursday
like,
misspell with a couple letters, 457 maybe.
yeah, it's Thursday. It's Thursday without the vowels. So
Sorry, Thursday, if you're listening. I don't think you are.
no,
But
Thursday. If you're listening, you need to take this to heart.
actually, it's true.
Uh,
I work in branding, and it's awful, dude. It's terrible.
it's
Like,
so
take some
bad.
free consulting. Like, change your brand,
Yeah, it's just like
brand
it's like,
uniformity.
oh yeah, I want to plug your channel. How do you find it? I don't know. Like, so okay, yeah. But anyway, if you happen to find his channel, give it a look. He does some pretty fun stuff. But anyway, I guess the final note that I want to close out on is uh we were talking about confession and priests and whatnot, and earlier in the conversation we were talking about a spirit of appreciation.
Mm.
Y'all may decide that you hate this priest, or you really dislike how the various priests handle different issues, but you know what, they're still hearing confessions, and they might be terrible confessors. They might be that type of priest that's saying like, "Oh, don't worry about that. As long as your wife doesn't find out, it's fine." Like they might be like that, but at the same time, that confession is still valid. That assuming all the other requirements are met. And these priests are literally bringing people back from the brink of hell. So, like, if you can't be appreciative of the priest himself, be appreciative of his priestly character, of the
Mm.
office that he holds. Pray for them, be nice to them. You know what? If you need to find out 2 dates about your priest, you need to find out the date of his birth, and you need to find out the date of his ordination, and you need to write him happy birthday cards and congratulations cards on the anniversary of his ordination.
No, that's a really thoughtful
Um,
idea. I don't do that. That's a great idea.
yeah, you know what? If he likes scotch, get him a bottle of scotch. Invite him over for dinner. Support our priests, because these guys, even if like they're bad priests or they're incompetent or whatever, like they still said yes to the call. And you know what? If you want to be exceptional, if you want to step up, it's like, okay, we got to take care of our family. Take care of your priests. This guy doesn't, oh, I mean, in the East he might, but it's just like, this guy doesn't have a wife to take care of him. Invite him over for a nice family meal, get him out of the rectory, take care of our priests. So,
No, that's a really really nice thing, because I know we talked about it on the highest level, right? We talked about, if you're struggling with Pope Francis and the future of the church, pray for him. But I love that you brought it down to the local level. Don't
mhm.
just apply it to this general, like, because that's so abstract. Like Pope Francis, us, rad trads, like progressives. It's all these like big nameless, faceless groups that we were kind of talking about. It's like, no, go help like your local pastor. Like, see how you can pour in. Oh man, that's really wonderful. That's yeah, there's just a lot of wisdom in that. There really is. And I did actually find Thursdays. I did
Oh,
actually,
yeah. He looks like he changed his handle.
yeah, to Steuben Thursday, which I think matches something else. So I'm sorry, Thursday, you already did create more brand consistency, and I just called you out publicly live
I'm not
for
sorry. You
that.
should be doing better.
But yeah, no, and then the video that I just shared, the link that I just shared, is to the 99 video. Confession is a place of victory, is the title that I incorrectly remembered by Ascension, but I think it's really wonderful. And actually I think I am so sorry, I forgot the name, but whoever retro Retro
Retrocalypse.
Radicalips. There we go. Sorry, these things to like read versus say aloud. But I think that's actually a great place to like get yourself in a good frame of mind for revisiting the sacrament kind of after a long time. So it might be especially encouraging for you. And it's just a really beautifully done video. It's 8 minutes long, so not terribly long. Much less long winded than Kyle and myself. So, um, and I don't know that we missed. Did we miss any questions that came through? I think we kind of addressed everything kind of ad hoc. I didn't see anything. I just want to make sure. I know you were looking better than I sometimes. So
this was a great 1 hour interview, man.
Yeah, no, you're welcome for this really brief, short, to the point, formal, guided interview. But my friend, seriously, this was a pleasure. I learned a lot. Thank you for talking with me, and struggling with these things. I'm really appreciative of you and your work, and to everyone listening, please do go follow him. Kyle, unlike Thursday, his brand is really easy. It's just Kyle Whittington at Kyle Whittington. So you can probably find that pretty easily. And my priest is a Franciscan hermit Marian. Oh, interesting. That is really, really interesting. That's awesome. It's wonderful when you can find a great priest and confessor, and that is one of those things that I think we should offer it up if we don't have it. But if you all are able to seek out someone who can provide that spiritual direction, alongside the confession that we've been talking about, that's really wonderful. Just that comment from Roberto kind of reminded me of that. Like, if there is a luxury in the church that you can indulge in, like try to find a good confessor who you can go to for spiritual direction. And they don't have to be the same person. I know that's not always the game, but if you're so fortunate as to find a priest who can do both, I think it's really, really a blessing.
Get you a man who can do both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh, that's so cool that you're painting while listening to I cannot pronounce it. Retrocalypse. Yeah, I like it. It's so cool. Like it catches my eye and then I just can't pronounce it. But my mom's a painter actually. So yeah, I love that's great. That's great. So, without further ado, thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of It's Knowable podcast. I have been joined tonight by my friend and guest, Kyle Whittington, talking about the importance of resisting radicalism as a traditional Catholic. So if you enjoyed this, please do like it, share it, comment below, preferably nice things, but we will take any comments because they still feed the algorithm. And if you happen to be one of the 10 people still listening, please do share feedback you have, anything you want to see in the future. At this stage, I have a ton of ideas, but I'm still formulating my precise approach. So there's a lot of room to receive feedback. So you're in a fortunate position in that sense. So yeah. And thank you all so much for tuning in and spending your Friday night with us. I hope you all have a great night and take care. Thanks again.
Oh,
Thanks, Kyle.